Here we go. Well, welcome and good morning.
Good morning.
Let's see, I know just about everyone here, so. The real issue in spirituality is interpretive frameworks. The nature of what we are, the nature of our intelligence, is such that it spontaneously generates interpretations, basically hypotheses of what it thinks experience is, what it thinks it's experiencing, what it thinks it is, i.e. what you are, what it thinks the world is, what it thinks is going on, all of this. We're all very familiar with this. It's, it's normal mental functioning. But these interpretive frameworks are inaccurate, which is fine is for their purposes, because their purposes are functional, and an average and approximation is quite sufficient. An approximation will do just fine. But in terms of the implications of what's actually going on, these interpretive frameworks are our anchor. They're our prison cell. They're our containment. They are our impediment, and they're the sole impediment. The only real issue in spirituality is these interpretive frameworks. Reality is not an issue. What reality is completely self-evident and completely obvious. It's the interpretive frameworks that make reality seem to be other than it is. And the implications of the ways in which it seems to be other are fraught with all sorts of potential problems and limitations of, we're going to die, we're limited, we're dependent upon the world, we're dependent upon circumstances being just so, we're vulnerable, if things don't go well, we suffer, if things go well, it's great, but it's really hard to get things to go well, and even when they go well, they don't go well for very long, and so on and so forth. And just all the, we're all very familiar with this. This is the normal struggle of trying to enjoy life. But unfortunately, this normal struggle doesn't really exist. I should say, actually, fortunately, it doesn't really exist. Unfortunately, you may think it exists erroneously. So the basic principle of spirituality is the discovery that these interpretive frameworks are essentially imaginary, which enables one to look beyond them and see what is actually here. And when one sees what's actually here, it turns out, very fortunately, to be a wonderful state of affairs, of absolute freedom, absolute independence, absolute invulnerability, and absolute fullness. What could be nicer? And it turns out to already be the case. And so it's not a matter of making this the case or achieving some condition where this is the case, but simply noticing that it is the case. And the reason we don't notice it's the case is these interpretive frameworks, which the mind spontaneously generates, unfortunately, or anyway, challengingly, are held in the unconscious to be objectively true. So we don't know they're interpretive frameworks, we just think they're real, they're fact, it's just how it is. And so, basically, everything that anyone thinks they know what it is a sign of an interpretive framework. Because it turns out that the hallmark, the very nature of reality is you can't know what it is. It's uninterpretable. It's unresolvable. This unresolvability, we're going to talk a lot about unresolvability today. Unresolvability is the principle by which one can come to see the way in which these interpretive frameworks are inaccurate, and come to see very directly that they are not objectively true, that they're essentially just hypotheses that are being held in the mind. And once that is seen, one can very easily notice what the actual reality of one's experience consists of, because of course it's not hidden. Experience is right here. It's not concealed or blocked in any way. The only impediment, as I say, to seeing and recognizing clearly what it is and how it is that we think we already know. And the way we think we know it happens to be inaccurate. So the glue, or I should say, the basic principle that enables these interpretive frameworks to seem to be accurate is the principle that we can know what anything is. We think we know what things are. We think we know what things are. We think that's a chair, and I know what a chair is. This is a computer, and I more or less know what a computer is. This is a room, and I more or less know what a room is. You're people, and you're other people, and I more or less know what other people are. This is me, and I more or less know what me is, and so on and so forth. And we're all very familiar with this way of looking at our experience. But it's wrong. It's inaccurate because reality is unresolvable. What this means, it's not a vague or general principle at all. It's a very specific, very obvious principle. Experience is unresolvable. When you look at experience, any experience, what is it you're experiencing? Like say you're seeing something, say you're seeing your hand, So what is it you're seeing in your hand? Oh, I'm just seeing my hand. So that's a knee-jerk interpretive frame. I'm just seeing my hand. Big whoop-de-doo. I see my hand every day, a million times, and, just normal, and it's not particularly interesting unless you're interested in hands. But if I begin to look more closely, well, what is this that I'm seeing? What shape is it? Well, the edges are a little fuzzy. I mean, they look pretty sharp, but if I look really, really close, the edges are a little fuzzy. So exactly what shape is it? Exactly what color is it? Well, gosh, it's this flesh color, right? Okay, very simple, but wrong. How many shades of color do I see in my hand? Literally infinite. And in the next instant, a different palette of infinite colors because the light shifts, the angle of my eye shifts, maybe even slightly. The focus of my attention shifts. Everything is drifting in experience. Experience is a fluid, constantly morphing actuality that is solidified and stabilized through a very heavy-handed kind of a computer processing that the mind does effortlessly. For example, as you're sitting here, you're moving slightly, maybe not much. You're sitting pretty still, but you move a little bit. And every time you move, everything moves, right? But the mind effortlessly says, no, everything stays the same. I move. But the experience, if you look at the experience, it's actually the whole room goes like this. Every time I shift my head like this, and the whole room goes. That's the experiential actuality. But the mind corrects that and says, no, the room stays here. The room is not moving. The room is stable. My head moves. And that's, most people would say, well, of course the room's not moving. It's a room sitting here. Of course it's not moving. My head moved. But that's not the experiential actuality. The experiential actuality, if you look at it, is that everything continually moves. And the point of view does not. Right? Isn't that interesting? You're always in the center of your experience. You're driving down the street in your car, and you're right here. You're not moving. The entire world is moving around. A car is a device to make the world move around you. Your feet are devices to make the world rotate under your feet. When I get up and walk, I'm pushing the whole world back. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Right? This is experientially obvious. It flies. It's absurd. It flies completely counter to, normal frame of reference. To consensus reality and all this stuff. But this is exactly the point. What if experience is true? What if everything we think we know about the world is actually derived from experience and not the other way around? Which, of course, is obviously the case if you think about it. I mean, where do we get our ideas of what things are, or not there even are things? From experience. So experience is the prime condition. Experience is the primal fact. And so where do we get off taking the way experience is and saying, no, it's not really like that. It's really like this. That we have the authority in our imagination to do that arbitrarily, when the evidence of experience is quite the contrary. Experientially, everything is continually moving. Experientially, there is no stability. Experientially, no shapes or colors are constant for even an instant. Experientially, only the present moment exists. That's very interesting. There's no past or future if you look at experience. And it's weirder than that. If you look really, really closely, the present moment doesn't even exist because it has no duration. How weird is that? But anyway, the point is not what reality is, because reality will take care of showing you that, because it is what it is. It's not a matter of trying to demonstrate it or assert it. The real point is to invalidate or essentially demonstrate that these interpretive frames of reference are inaccurate. They're approximations, and they're approximations that are wildly wrong. And because we typically buy these interpretive frames of reference, we don't recognize that. We don't realize how far off the mark we are. And so an unfortunate side effect of that is we have sold out our own opportunity to enjoy and avail ourselves of the astounding qualities that reality actually consists of, which turn out to be wonderful. Fortunately, I mean, it could be the other way around. It could turn out to be horrible. I mean, the material hypothesis could be true, and you're just a tiny little semi-evolved ape wandering around in a big world that's out to try and squish you, right? I mean, that's basically the materialist philosophy put in a cartoonish way, right? And it's actually not like that at all. Actually, the world is in you. Actually, you are the reality which the world appears in. Actually, you are the soul consciousness which all beings appear in. And all this is experientially self-evident. And again, the only thing that prevents us from noticing this fact is our unquestioning subservience and our unquestioning acceptance of these frames of reference that we have bought into through being brainwashed in them, through having it being constantly reinforced when we're infants. I mean, when you were 1 day old, you didn't know there was an objective world. You didn't know. I mean, when you turned your head around, the whole world went shoot when you were 1 day old, and you just were there, and like that's just how it is. But gradually you learned, no, honey, the world's not spinning; it's you moving your head, and so on and so forth. So we've all been brainwashed into this consensus reality that is constantly reinforced by the information we're getting from people around us, constantly reinforced by the very structure of language. I mean, I could spend all day talking about the inaccuracies implied by the inherent structure of language and grammar and so on. In language we have subjects and verbs, which implies there are things and actions. In experience, there's no things. In experience, there's no actions. Experience is much subtler than that. It's much weirder than that, because again, these gestalts of experiential characteristics that we collapse down into thingness don't actually have any coherence. They aren't things. They are infinite, world lines of experiential characteristics that never stabilize into any coherence. They always are different and never repeat. So in what sense, how do you take that actuality and turn it into a concrete thing that is just sitting there inertly? Only through imagination, through hypnosis, essentially. So, that's the theoretical basis of what I have to present. The practical basis, so given that, so what? Then what? Now what?
Peter?
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit about the paintings on the walls?
A little bit later.
Well, no, I mean, in what you're talking about, in terms of, So someone stood at an easel, saw a thing.
Where's there an easel? Where's there someone standing? Where's there seeing? Is this. You may imagine someone stood at an easel and saw and painted, but that's an imagination which is actual imagination. But it's not an actual person or an actual easel or an actual painting. You don't know anyone painted these.
Well,
You can assume they painted them.
I'm a painter, and that's what my question is.
Right.
Coming from this, it's so when I'm standing in an easel painting a still life, for instance.
Right.
And I'm painting I'm seeing a thing, and I'm painting a thing.
Right.
And I'm trying to bridge that with what you just said about the experience of.
Okay. The way to bridge it is nothing of what you just said is actual. There is no easel. There is no seeing. There is no painting. There is no thing you're painting. None of that actually exists. What does actually exist is an unresolvable infinite field of experiential actuality, which you may be narrating as being you standing in an easel painting a thing that you're trying to capture and paint or whatever. Right? But that interpretation is inaccurate in the sense that you can't resolve the infinite, never repeating, constantly new flow of actual presentation of experiential characteristics into an easel and a painting and a this and a that. And all of that right now is just a fantasy in your mind. You say, oh, I call it a memory that really happened, but you claim that it really happened, but your evidence that it really happened is that you remember it happening. And the memory itself, what is memory? Well, memory is a presence of experiential characteristics and experience. And we have the common notion, but memory is about something that really happened. But what does that mean? What does something that really happened mean? What does about mean? And so on and so forth. It's not a matter of negating all that or saying nothing happened and it's not anything, but it's a matter of pointing out that what actually happened is beyond the way you're describing it as happening, and beyond the way you're thinking of it as happening. But so anyway, that's a little bit of a digression. We'll get into discussion in a few minutes. So the theoretical basis of all this is the juxtaposition of interpretive frameworks onto actual reality and the fact that any interpretive framework is erroneous. An interpretive framework cannot be actual, cannot be accurate, simply because reality is unresolvable with sufficient precision to hold it as being a certain way accurate. Reality has some intrinsic, very weird properties which render it impossible to collapse down into stable objects and conditions and things and entities like we normally do. So that's the basic principle we're up against, is the juxtaposition of the reality of your experience versus these unconsciously held interpretive frameworks. And the fact that those two diverge, and they diverge radically. They don't just diverge a little bit. The implications of each are drastically different. What the world actually is, what reality actually is drastically other than anything you can possibly think it is, and certainly anything that consensus reality view typically held it to be. So that's the theory. Now in practice, what do you do about it? Well, the glue, the basic principle upon which these interpretive frameworks are erected is the idea that things are resolvable, that you can know what something is. And then, based on that sort of foundation, then we build on that and think we do know what particular things are. But if you attack that, if you notice that the nature of experience, the nature of your actual experience, not esoterically particularly, just what's right here, right now, everyday old experience, the nature of this experience is such that it is unresolvable and hence uninterpretable as being anything. Anything. Because any way you hold it to be, there are ways in which your actual experience will diverge from that, will deviate from that, will not be comprehensively included in that what you're holding it to be. And this is very easily noticeable. You can be with any experience whatsoever and experience what the experience actually is, and then look at what you're used to thinking it is. Oh, I'm looking at a person sitting in a chair. Okay, great, a person sitting in a chair. What am I really seeing? I'm seeing a universe of colors that are continually morphing experientially, never repeating. I'm looking at an infinitely complex shape that I can't possibly collapse down into being a specific shape that I can actually define and know what it is, and so on and so forth, all of which is continually morphing and changing and never repeating. So I say, okay, well, I'm seeing you, but when I say I'm seeing you, that's a euphemism for this completely unresolvable, infinitely morphing sea of characteristics. So it's bravado to claim that is something I can get a handle on, and yet we do it effortlessly. We think, oh, I know you're you, and you look like you. I know you're you, and you look like you. You look the same as you did last time I saw you. No, you look entirely different than you did last time I saw you. You've never looked the same way twice. You can't. I mean, here's a very simple experiment, which we've all experienced many times, probably the women more than the men, but everyone. Look at your face in the mirror, and just look at it for a minute or two, and try and figure out what you look like. And you're looking in the mirror, and it's like, well, yeah, I'm looking at myself, but then just be with, so what exactly does my face look like? What shape is it? What do I look like? And, unless you're really, really, really heavy-handed at essentially denial, you'll notice, oh my God, what do I look like? You look at your face and you'll feel like if you do it for 5 minutes straight, after a while you'll feel like someone put some acid in your coffee or breakfast or something, because you'll just be seeing all of these. I mean, you're just looking at your face, right? It's not like you're not seeing what's there, but what's there doesn't resolve into any simple coherence in any stable way. Just the very nature of what you're seeing as the experience of your face. Now, it's very important to realize that you never see your face. You only see experience. And you may call it, oh, this is the experience of my face. But you're not seeing your face, you're seeing experience. You're not seeing a room, you're seeing experience. When you go to sleep at night, you don't see you going to sleep, you see experience. When you dream, you're not seeing a dream, you're seeing experience. And so everything, that chair is not a chair, it's an experience. Now I may say, oh, it's an experience of a chair, and that may be so, but the question is, well, but what does that mean? It's experience of a chair. So I'm seeing, when I see this chair, I'm seeing experience. When I see you, I'm seeing experience. The experience I'm seeing of you is not fundamentally different than the experience of seeing the chair. And suppose I go to sleep at night and I start dreaming, and I dream that I'm sitting here having a conversation with you. I'm seeing an experience which I could very well say is an experience of you. And experientially, there's no difference. How can I know the difference? Because there's no, the thingness of the apparent objects that are experienced is being supplied interpretively against the context, the actual context of present experience. So the only thing that's ever here is present experience. And present experience is slippery. It's unstable. It's dynamic. It's continually morphing. It's never repeating. And if you just notice this fact, just be with your experience and notice its absolute subtle and yet extremely specific and extremely obvious dynamism, you will realize in your gut, I mean, not realize as an abstraction or as an intellectual concept, but you will experientially, texturally realize the slipperiness of this astounding phenomenon that we have the arrogance to think we have a handle on. That's not too true. Okay. So anyway, that's the gist of what I have to present. Of course, it has infinite potential elaborations and so on and so forth, and I would be glad and eager to explore them with you in terms of how any of this strikes you, or what your experience with any of this is.
Well, it's really fun to hear you talk about it and sit here and look at it while we talk.
Well, yeah, of course, because the thing about this is, it's not, and we're talking about what's right here, right now, so it's not an abstraction, it's not removed. It's not about something else that's theoretical or something that's over there or anything like that. We're talking about what this right here is. This is reality. And it turns out, this is absolutely transcendental, absolutely amazing and astounding. But to appreciate that and realize that and enjoy it fully, one has to recognize that fact. And again, the only thing that keeps us from recognizing it is that we think we already know what it is, and what we think we know is a very pale, very, very, very pale imitation of the actual thing, which has implications which are vastly diminished from the actual animals here. So we censor the fullness of what we are into a paltry caricature that we think is ourselves and our reality, and then we don't get to explicitly enjoy this astounding transcendental nature and fullness that we actually are.
So in terms of deconstructing, we're going into default mode before we even realize it. It's almost subconscious.
Exactly. That's the challenge, because we think it's really hard to look at what something is because we think we already know.
Right.
And that is such a knee-jerk, automatic thing, and it's so self-verifying. It's hard to, if you start questioning it, for most people you're going to be questioning, you're going to move into abstraction and arguing with yourself and thinking theoretically, thinking about ideas, which is not where the action is.
And sometimes I think we have had direct experience.
Well, everyone has direct experience continually. That's the paradox of the whole thing.
But surrendered to that without getting in the way of it. But it is not on liberty to do that. So what? And I think this is something that I struggle with in terms of meditating. I think sometimes it actually can be putting more constructs onto that whole.
Absolutely.
And for me, in the moments I have felt like I was out of that, I was usually in an altered state of some kind by whatever, and in the presence of someone who holds that more as a normal state. I felt like that did maybe help me feel more to not go into my own default. But in terms of a practice, I mean, it's just going back to attention of noticing that we're constantly imposing this unreality on our reality.
Right.
But do you go any further to say that there's a way that we can help to uncondition ourselves?
Yes. Yes. Looking at our conditioning, looking at the interpretive frames of reference, is generally fruitless, because looking at them is basically what we already do. So looking at them, even looking at them with an eye to deconstructing them, is playing on their turf. You're going to their home territory, and they rule there. So you got to really have some serious chops to be able to meet them on their own turf and come out with anything without them dominating. So the trick is to do exactly the opposite. Just bypass. So if interpretive frameworks is over here, go over there. If interpretive frameworks is being with your experience in various ways, find some place in your experience where the interpretive frameworks are not there or not particularly strong, and hang out there. So typically a meditator will, I'm going to sit and I'm going to, I don't know, whatever. There's so many, I'm going to feel my breath, I'm going to, look at the thought stream, I'm going to feel the energies, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But if you find something in your experience that has almost zero charge, almost zero conceptual investment, that's the best place to start looking. So, the sound of a car driving by in traffic, watching leaves wiggling in the breeze. I mean, typically, in short, basically anything that a normal person would qualify as spacing out. Spacing out is being with your experience to some degree outside of interpretive framework. It's like, oh, where did I just go? All the things get together. I got to focus. I got a job to do or whatever, right? Where was I? And you can't answer that question because there's no interpretation of where you were because you're outside of an interpretive framework relatively. And spacing out, what I coined the technical term arbitrarily, which I call noticing, which is notice the actuality of any experience directly, outside the context of holding it to be this or that. And again, the easiest place to do that is in some experience that seems to have nothing particularly to do with anything, and yet is actually present. You can do it with thought, you can do it with things like that, but typically for people who are just ramping up into this, getting into thought and things like that is more challenging because we're really used to being with thought as the weapon of the tyrant, so to speak. So typically some sensory experience or other, like the feeling of the chair under your butt, or the feeling of your hair on your forehead, or just something that's it's basically sort of irrelevant. It's just sort of noise in the system that we typically wouldn't direct any attention whatsoever to. And yet it's there. And that there-ness is really interesting. The there-ness, the actuality of it, turns out to be its power. Because what is there and the way that it is there is very, very strange. And in that strangeness, reality is revealed. So, it sounds very general. Find some place in your experience that doesn't matter. But so it's sort of the onus is on you to play with that and discover for yourself what that means. But typically, if you look at something that has any degree of narrative charge, you'll look at it and right away you'll go off and there'll be all sorts of stuff about it, or history of thought, or whatever. It'll be a springboard into a whole universe of narrative, even if it's not verbal narrative, but just sort of a whole universe. Whereas in noticing, there's a wow factor. There's a kind of an ambiguity. There's a kind of it's not fuzziness, but it's almost like it's both and. There's a weirdness present, and that's an indicator that this is, yes, play with that, go there, be with that. Now, typically for beginners in noticing, you'll notice something about noticing, which is that you spin off on it almost right away. Like you'll say, okay, noticing happens by itself all the time in everyone's experience, but we don't value it or discredit it. We think our attention is wandered, so we sort of squelch and we go back to whatever we're focusing on, right? But so noticing is doing exactly the opposite. When the attention wanders, you let it, you be with it, you be gentle, you let it run wild. Noticing is like being with a wild animal. The more you try to control or manipulate being with a wild animal, the more you're going to spook it. Whereas the more you just completely let go and let it be, the more liable it is to be to some degree interactive, right? And notice,
getting into a flow, getting past the thinking, also
right.
into a state of unconscious interacting with that.
Yeah, and it's not so much getting past it because you already are past it. It's more a matter of, and again, a mental framework is not the enemy. It's just something that we use. We carry our mental frameworks around in front of us and say, oh my God, I'm stuck behind these bars, but we're the one that's holding it, it's right here, and it's only right here where we're holding it. The vast majority of our experience is outside of interpretive framework. explicitly all the time, but we don't notice it because we typically hold our interpretive framework front and center in front of our eyes. It's like wearing sunglasses. Oh my gosh, the whole world is rosy, the whole world is rosy, but no, the world isn't rosy, it's just right here it's rosy. So it's a matter of letting yourself spread out a bit. So thought is not the enemy, and thought will always be occurring, and ideas will always be occurring. But typically, like as I was saying, to a beginner, a relative, let's say a novice in this exploration, you'll notice something happens. As soon as you start noticing, you snap out of it. You go, oh wow, I was noticing. Or you'll just spin off into an interpretive framework or something, and then you'll be back in that. And, the typical reaction, like for someone who's trying to meditate, is, oh no, let me go back to that. And the trick with noticing is exactly the opposite. When you spin off, let go. Just completely let go, let yourself go. It's like, okay. And then you spin back off and you're back in your world, whatever, you're back in your drama. But sooner or later, you'll find yourself again outside that framework. You'll find yourself just let yourself feel that. Don't try to make anything of it. Don't try to do anything with it. Just feel it. Feel the texture. Feel it the way you feel how the temperature of water in a bathtub before you get in it. You just put your head in and feel it's there. There's nothing. You just feel it fully, but just feel it. And again, you're going to spin off right away. Okay, so you just let go right away. Don't try to cling to it. Because clinging to it is you create an it to cling to, and any it is an interpretation, because there's no actual it there. So again, you be contented, feel it, sort of just feel what's there, experientially. And you spin off, okay, let go. And this is the cycle. This cycle just goes on and on. But the trick about this cycle is if you really feel what's there every time that happens, it will begin to dominate. Because it has authority. It is real. It is realer and more powerful than your interpretive framework. And as you build up skill at being able to be with what's there, so-called, you will also begin to notice that it's interesting, it's fun. It begins to seduce you and draw you and pull you into it. And then more and more, this process turns into an addiction, a seduction, where you're just, I love, you just love this mode, and it draws you to it, it takes you to it, and you do it for the joy of it, you do it for the bliss of it, essentially. And this is the entirety of what I call this yoga. It's simply feeling your direct experience outside of an interpretive framework, wherever you find it, and ultimately that takes over, and you discover there's nothing but, and you discover that's all you've ever been doing, and you even discover that even these interpretive frameworks are that. So everything sort of turns inside out, and what you discover this to actually be is beyond anyone's wildest expectations. It's beyond anything. It's beyond the most glorious things that have been said. I mean, all the amazing spiritual hyperbole you've heard, you've read about how this amazing condition of divine reality and all that, it's all true. This is an astounding, inconceivable miracle, very explicitly. And it's possible, and it's actually fairly easy to come to see that directly. Yeah.
So when you begin practicing this, is there any particular circumstance that you shouldn't do it in? Like
No.
You're at work,
Uh-uh.
you're at work and you're interacting with your fellow employees. So is that a good time?
Anytime.
Anytime.
Anytime at all.
Well, it doesn't disturb what you normally would do.
Not in the least. It's like noticing a crack on the wall. Because this experience always, the seamlessness and the coherence of our experience is full of cracks, and this is just noticing them. So even when you're involved in an intense conversation with someone, you'll just your attention will say, it might come right back, but in those moments, which we typically discount, it's a matter of switching the value scale. So rather than something being sharpened and focused and having a handle on it being a priority, just let these cracks into wow, where was I? What was going on there? Let those cracks into that, all of a sudden, that's the high value. That's all. And you don't do anything about it, because it's already happening spontaneously. Everyone experiences reality all the time, literally all the time, and everyone even notices it explicitly a lot of the time. But we are experts at discounting that, downplaying it. It's, oh my God, where was I? I spaced out. Let me pull myself back together here and focus.
One thing I noticed is like coming out of a space like that. For me, I do ecstatic dance. If I dance for more than 2 hours, the brain disappears. I'm in this soma state. I'm not processing that whole breath. And I have a lovely bliss, and I feel a lot of things, not just what I don't think about them. I'm feeling, and I'm happy. Endorphins, whatever. Also with ethnogens, I think that there's a way to perhaps take some of my filter away. And what I notice is coming back out of a trance state for whatever reason, there's this way I feel it with me back.
Right.
And kind of often the language that they're talking.
Right. Sure.
And that edge kind of reflects back to me how I shrink and expand it back into my little family, so for me, sometimes in those points, I find I resist. There's this part of me that's like, damn, come down, or no. And I kind of feel sad that I'm not able to maintain that. I can feel the shrinking in my own perception.
Right. Yeah. But see, there's a subtle, in this case that you're describing, I would say there's a subtle interpretation of what the open state is vis-a-vis the closed state. So even you're interpreting the open state as being something, even as you're enjoying its openness.
Right. And I'm lost with that.
Yeah. Which basically cuts you off from it. I mean, it's extremely slippery and subtle. A noticing condition, a condition of being with actual, let's call it naked experience, is not the opposite of a conditioned experience. It's just, it's the ground condition that is always present. An interpretive framework is like an island that's in an infinite sea. The island is in the sea, and the sea doesn't go away. The sea is always there. Whether you're focusing on the island or not, the sea is right there. It's just a matter of noticing that it's there. So it's not like, oh damn, I've left the sea, now I'm on the island and the sea's gone. The sea's right there still. It's receded a little bit in terms of your orientation. And so, and again, our native mode, when we're used to oriented interpretive frameworks, is this versus that. This versus that, this versus that. It's either this or it's that. That is not this is not that. And of course, we subliminally bring that mindset to this kind of an investigation, just because we're so familiar with it. It just makes so much sense. It's so obvious. But this condition is not actually like that. It's not the opposite of everything. It is what everything already is. And as one gains more and more familiarity with it experientially, it actually swallows all of these other modes. It swallows thought, it swallows interpretation, it swallows individuality without eliminating it at all. It just shows that all these conditions which we have interpreted as being so personal and limited and essentially frustrating are actually transcendental radiance. So it's the native mode of actuality is inclusive. It's not a this or that. It's not an either or. It's not even a both and. It's even weirder than that. It's just an absolutely inclusive, infinite multidimensionality. So whatever anything seems to be, yes, it's that too. That too. That too. That too. That too. It has no enemies. It has no opposites. It's completely inclusive.
Could we go back to the noticing thing
Sure.
again? So often I think all of us spontaneously noticing.
Yes.
And then there's the aspect of noticing or noticing.
Right.
And if we don't spin off, or, is there a point where you're spontaneously noticing, and you notice you're noticing, and you can just hang out there
Yeah.
without spinning off?
Yeah, ultimately this is what happens. Ultimately, this is all very, very slippery and paradoxical. Because in actual fact, you're always doing nothing but noticing, because noticing is what experience is. But because of the strange nature of these interpretive frameworks, they can seem to be other than noticing. And that's their whole stock and trade, is making things seem to be other than they are. And so as one develops facility in this yoga, as one develops, sort of integration and sinking into it, with more and more experience and more, just being integrated with it, one discovers that experience is this. Experience is transcendental. Experience is noticing. Even being lost in thought is noticing. Even being heavily identified with emotional reactivity is noticing. Because we think we know what everything is, but we don't. So you don't need to stop knowing everything you know, because you don't know everything you know. It's just the thought that you think you know what everything you know. But everything's transcendent. What is emotional reactivity? How does it happen? What's it made of? What's doing it? Where does it exist? What mechanism does it happen on? Those questions are unanswerable. Not because we haven't studied it enough, but because they're unanswerable. It's a miraculous apparition. How can, obsessive individuated identification, with egoic conditions occur? It's a miracle. It's inconceivable. So the very thing that we fight against and strive against as our problems are literally miraculous apparitions. And when you see that, then these phenomena themselves are a revelation of actual miraculousness and are pure noticing. I mean, everything becomes sacramental. The experience is a sacrament of the transcendental. Because it happens to be. It just happens to be. And even our delusion, our ignorance, our misidentification, our smallness, and our suffering are all completely impossible, miraculous phenomena that are coming from nowhere, made of nothing. I mean, how does that happen? How does that happen? It can't be answered. And in that unanswerability, unanswerability is not a logical flaw. It's unanswerable because what it is ungraspable. It's literally miraculous. It bootstraps itself up out of essentially nothing, or God knows what. Right? Literally, God knows what.
So it's structures of interpretation that sort of give this compression that we're going into a state and out of
Right.
a state rather than use.
Right. And as you say, it's just an impression because you're always in the same state. You're always in this absolute miraculous presence of inconceivable, experience. I mean, what is experience? We're all very familiar with experience, and we think of it as absolutely normal, even mundane. It's just a given. I'm not sure experience is here, of course, but what's happening, right? But wait a minute. Experience is here. Okay, experience is here. What does that mean? How can that be? How can experience be here? What's doing it? Where's it coming? Oh, it's a biochemical byproduct of electrochemical activities in my central nervous system. Yeah, right. What does that mean? It's a byproduct of matter which arises from the Big Bang and the four forces of physics. Okay, great. What does that mean? The Big Bang, okay. Try and wrap your head around that. What is the Big Bang? How does that reduce anything to normalcy? How does that reduce anything to any kind of dullness? There's a vast infinite explosion in nothingness coming from nowhere. I mean, you may as well just say, God said, let there be light. It's just another words for saying exactly the same thing. Right? But literally, And here is the evidence. Here is this this inconceivable phenomena of your experience. I mean, look at how powerful your experience is. Look at how instantaneously and effortlessly you perceive every aspect of everything you're experiencing in every field of your experience in real time, with no processing time. There's no lag time. It's not like you see, and let me see, what color am I seeing there? Okay, I'm seeing that color. It's not like that, is it? Just bang. You know, you open your eyes and it's all right there instantly. How can that happen? You know, I mean, it's literally inconceivable powers, inconceivable functionality. And yet it's completely normal. It is completely normal. It's always like that. It's always just like this. But just like this, turns out to be astoundingly transcendental rather than the dull normalcy that you may imagine it to be. And it's just, so again, ultimately it's just a matter of noticing that fact. We've been talking about an hour. Should we have a 5-minute break? Why don't we do that and we can get up and stretch? We'll be having lunch in another hour, so it won't be long, so it doesn't need to be a very long break.
And I really got something more tangibly about, that's what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Good.
But at the same time, the question, the red flag that flew up was, is my experience the only thing that's real?
Yes.
Yeah.
Check it out. Try and find something else. Where are you going to look?
But there seems to be some consensus among people who have kind of flipped into that kind of awareness of that being real. And I myself have experienced that in the past.
I'm sorry, what being real?
Yeah, what being real?
Well,
there seems to be some kind of consensus, is there not?
That what? What consensus of what?
That the effulgent, the unfolding, is what is real.
Sure. And that's what your experience is. Your experience is a continual, ongoing, infinite, transcendental unfoldment.
Unfiltered?
Of course it's unfiltered. Filtering happens in a context that is unfiltered. Filtering itself is unfiltered.
It's filtered in the sense that I have a physical position from which I'm observing.
You think you do. But that's just a filter.
Yeah, that's right.
Where's your experience being seen from? When you go to sleep, where's your experience seen from?
Yeah, you're right.
When you start dreaming, where's your experience seen from?
No, I got
It
it.
bootstraps it.
I'm way out there.
Yeah, it bootstraps itself up with a virtual framework, with a virtual location.
Yeah.
But where's that coming from?
Yeah.
You know, that experience presents itself in a way as if as a particular location within experience that it's being experienced from. It's experience doing that. It's not the perspective that's doing the experience. It's the other way around.
Could you take me through that again?
In a dream, say you're in deep sleep and you don't know where you are. You don't even know that you are. Perhaps you're just whatever, right? Deep sleep, and then you start to dream, and you may seem to be somewhere. And you may seem to be in a body, and you may seem to be walking down the street or whatever, and then someone may come up to you, and you may start talking to them, whatever, right? It's just some random dream. And at that time, where are you? Where do you seem to be? You may seem to be more or less in the body that's walking down the street talking to someone. And yet, are you? You know, it is the dreaming that creates that virtual perspective that seems to give you a relative location within a relative framework of space and time and event. And then you wake up, and where was the space that seemed to be there when you were dreaming? It took place in a no-space condition of deep sleep, just bootstrapped itself up magically out of nothing. And here's all this space. Where does it go when you go to sleep? It's just like a dream when you wake up from a dream. It's gone. And of course our interpretive frameworks are waking state Nazis typically. So no, but this is the real escape. Deep sleep is something else and dreams are something else, but this is real. How real is this when you go to sleep? You don't even know it was ever here when you're in deep sleep. Right? This just disappears completely. It may as well never have existed as far as they know. So it's not that this isn't occurring. It's just that what this actually is that's occurring is the way it actually is, not some way we may be thinking of it as being. And it is doing all the presenting, so it holds all the cards, so it can present itself any way it wants. It can present itself as if, oh yeah, you're right there and not anywhere else, and everything is around that. Or it can present itself the way it does in deep sleep, where there's no particular there at all, or here at all for that matter, and there's no particular space or not. It's just these considerations just aren't even relevant. Right? It's not that it's non-spatial, it's just maybe not any particular spatial. Right? I mean, who knows what it is? You can't characterize it. Right? And then so on and so forth. So the trick is to see that experience is the context within which the way it seems to be presents itself, not the other way around. Experience is the actual condition, and the nature of this condition is such that it can present itself any way that it does. It can present itself like deep sleep. It can present itself like waking state. It can present itself like a dream. Who knows how many other ways it can present itself. And we're qualifying these ways as discrete ways, which is more interpretive framework. Because it's ongoingly the same. It's ongoingly, this now is, and it always looks different, and there's no way to categorize the different possible ways it can be, because they're always infinite and they never repeat. It looks the way it looks in some particular deep sleep event. It can look the way it looks here now. You've never experienced this moment before. Every single thing you're experiencing right now, you've never experienced before. It's already gone forever, and you're never going to experience it again. And that's ongoingly the case forever. Forever.
Can I ask another question?
Of course you can.
I'm just feeling a little lonely with that.
Uh-huh.
A little bit like, I don't even know how to go with that.
That's okay. You say you're feeling lonely. I can relate to that.
Yeah.
But you're alone, but you're not cut off from anything. You're not separated from anything. There's nothing you're removed from. On the contrary, you have absolute intimate access with anything that actually exists. Because for anything to actually exist, it has to be present in your experience. And as soon as it's present in your experience, it is so with absolute intimacy and absolute engagement. I mean, some stranger that you walk by, that you drive by when you're going 60 miles an hour down the road and you see someone there, and their presence in your experience is absolutely intimate, absolutely actual, total engagement. There's no barrier there at all. Right? So you have complete intimate engagement with everything that exists, and nothing outside your experience exists anyway, for you. Right? So you are alone because you're the only inhabitant of your universe. You're the only consciousness experiencing your universe. But you're not, there's no basis for being lonely, because even though you alone inhabit your universe, you have absolute intimate presence and engagement with everything.
Yeah, I think what's happening for me is that just in the context of this talk and this morning, is feeling a sort of I'm careening around between those places from naked awareness to feeling kind of cord. Like I feel a bit cord. And I think it's
what do you mean by cord?
By cord, I mean like an apple, like I've gotten some part of my strategy or some part of my way of viewing things is kind of.
Well, that's sort of the point, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. But it does
fun things can happen here.
Yeah.
But it's all good. It's all good. It is slippery. It's very slippery. And the slippery ultimately turns out to be a really nice thing. The slipperiness ultimately turns out to be, oh, thank God that it is that way. But in transitioning to awareness that it is that way, it can seem to be weird and even very threatening, because it's so radically different than the way we may be used to holding it. But again, that's just sort of that can seem to be a byproduct of this discovery. But the good news is, in actual fact, it is completely non-threatening. In actual fact, it's completely delightful and enjoyable, and is a fullness of exquisite beauty forever. But it does come with a certain amount of slipperiness, I gotta admit. But again, as I say, ultimately that turns out to be a good thing. Once you get over the initial knee-jerk reaction, wait a minute, this is different, wait a minute, this doesn't feel like it usually feels. You know, maybe I should watch out here.
I more or less have gotten everything you're saying here, but I'm wondering about your use of the word transcendence.
Yes.
Where that comes in.
Yes.
I'm not wondering what is being transcended when I'm simply noticing things.
Right. Transcendent, I use that word to refer to the way in which actuality is completely and utterly beyond any way of holding it, any way of defining it,
Okay.
any way of analyzing it, any way of determining it, any way of anything. It is beyond that, utterly,
Yeah.
not slightly.
Yeah.
Its very nature is such a thing that you cannot get a handle on it.
Oh, okay. So then you're saying that reality transcends us rather than us.
No, you are reality. You are transcendent.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But it certainly transcends anything you may think yourself to be, which is not what you actually are, because what you actually are is unthinkable. So whatever you think yourself to be, by definition, is less than you actually are, because what you actually are is literally unthinkable. That's another way that transcendental refers to unthinkable.
Yeah,
It can't be collapsed down to a
I
concept.
can see the logic there. From a logical standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, I understand now that neurologists have said, okay, the conscious part of the brain only is aware of, like 40 bits per second, right? Whereas the subconscious part of the brain is aware or processes 40 million bits of information per second.
And
so whatever we think we know, we don't.
Absolutely, and not only that, but you have to realize that the quantum energy, the transcendental quantum energy that the brain is made of, is processing infinite continuums in real time by quantum entanglement with the entire universe.
Right.
So that's part of that interaction too. So to try and quantize it in terms of measurable or countable bits of neuron firing or whatever is way too heavy-handed. Because again, you get into continua, and you get into infinities, and it's just transcendental.
Peter, I'm all in.
All in.
Everything I know is wrong. Would you talk a little bit about a little more about putting that into actual practice? I asked you this question about a year ago, but I'm still struggling with it. How to get better at noticing mechanically how to do it.
Very good question. But rather than answering that in general terms, I'd rather address it in specific terms. What issues do you find in noticing? What are you coming up against that seems like it could be improved, or that seems like it's in any degree of impediment, or any issues in any way whatsoever around that whole
thing? What has to do with suffering, when I can remember to notice and that everything that I know is wrong and stuff like that, I'm happier. And when I buy into consensus-based reality, I suffer. Right?
Yeah, the normal human point of view sucks.
Yeah. I mean, really.
Yeah, totally. If you want to hang out there, you got weird taste. No, I don't mean you. I mean.
I want it. I've been doing that for too long. So it's kind of about suffering.
Sure.
And how do you do it?
Okay. Well, I'm not sure this addresses exactly what you're thinking of, and if it doesn't, please come back with that. But an important aspect of the practice of noticing is to not approach it as remedial, to not approach it as, to not polarize it with suffering. Oh, there's suffering, and noticing is the antidote to suffering. So there's noticing on one side of the scale and suffering on the other side, and I'm suffering, so let me do some noticing. Because that collapses noticing down into part of your game structure, which is responsible for the suffering in the first place. Noticing is beyond the game. Noticing is leaving the game altogether. And so again, you say how to do that. Well, having said that, so what? Again, you have to sort of stumble onto the tricks of that for yourself. But the essence of noticing is to just be let go, and just like space out. It's like noticing is a lot like going to sleep, only you stay awake. Just like that for an instant, maybe. It doesn't, and it's not about duration. It's about actuality. Just be with it to the degree that it's actually there, as it's actually there. And again, you will tend to drift off and drift back into what feels like an interpretive framework, and just let it go. And so there's this, and sooner or later, don't fight. Again, fighting to notice, or trying to notice, is trying to incorporate noticing into your game structure and strategies again, which defeats it, because it can't be collapsed down to anything you can do or not do. It's not that kind of thing. So again, so you when you find yourself in noticing, you just really be with it. Again, don't focus on it. Don't just enjoy it, feel it. Just feel the lusciousness, feel the wow factor. Even if it's just an instant, you're walking along the street and you see an amazing flower, or for that matter, you see a dog's turd. I mean, whatever, you see something and it just, just any kind of thing, and that's noticing. That's noticing, and just it happens, and then you'll start drifting back off into some whatever, and just like free flow. So you flow into noticing and you flow out of noticing, and the very nature of noticing is that free flow. So the looser you are with noticing, the more strongly you're doing noticing. It's paradoxical. The less you try and do it, the more easy it is to do. The less you value it, the more valuable and powerful it becomes. So treating it as an antidote to suffering is putting value on it, and as soon as you put value on it, you're actually making it part of your game structure, which is the problem, which is the suffering. So you kill it, essentially, or you invalidate it, you emasculate it. Its power is in its flow. Its power is in its ease. I don't know how useful that is to you.
That was good, and I think a lot of times if I get into this state that life sucks, or I get into this state where there's conflict or stuff, okay, well I can resolve this by noticing my behavior, right, as opposed to. No, that was good. That was very much what.
A real good sort of overall mindset, an overarching mindset to approach this yoga in terms of is very sort of schizophrenic or double-valued.
Oh,
just on the one hand, I mean, this is my approach, and I'll say you, but I'm actually saying me. I'm not imputing qualities to you. But on the one hand, you are a completely useless, insane fuck-up. Your life sucks. It always will suck. You're never going to be competent in anything because you're a fuck-up. So that's the one hand, and then the other hand, there's this amazing, wow. And then you go back to the fuck-up, life sucks, and then you go to the wow, and then you go back to the... And that mindset actually keeps them separate. It keeps them from stirring, which actually empowers the noticing. And this is I phrase that in terms of you, but this is how I feel. I mean, I'm basically a failure in life. I'm a bright guy, but I've never managed to be really good at anything. I have things that I like and I'm fairly good at, and I would like to be better at, and I like to pretend I'm better at it than I am, but I'm not really, and I've never been successful at any of it particularly. I'm just sort of bumbling through life. It's a typical arrogant jerk, right? And that's the fact, and that's not going to change. It doesn't need to change because that's not the problem. The problem is thinking that that's all that's going on. See, that is going on, but it's not all that's going on. And in actual fact, that is tiny little, subroutine in this vast inconceivability that is infinite lusciousness, and that it turns out I also am. So even though I'm this fucked up failure of a human being who's approaching the end of his life in mediocrity, I'm also this inconceivable transcendental infinity
Yeah, man.
that is beyond space and time.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, you too. But that mindset actually facilitates noticing. It's a lot like, I think, and I don't know about 12-step stuff because I've never participated in it. It's like acknowledging instead of retaining, trying to own the power, retaining, I'm competent and I can do things. I can do noticing. I can't do shit. I'm a fuck up. It's like owning one's own powerlessness. I am powerless to do shit. And that's actually a very powerful spiritual operating platform, it turns out. Whereas the opposite, the sense of personal capability and personal empowerment and all that, is actually very self-defeating. Arrogance is the enemy of spirituality. and paradoxically, acknowledging arrogance just removes arrogance as an issue. As soon as I say I'm an arrogant asshole, then that removes arrogance as a problem at all. It's when I'm arrogant and I don't admit I'm too arrogant to admit I'm arrogant that arrogance is an impediment. And again, this isn't about you. But I'm just suggesting, I'm using myself as an example to show, instead of trying to unify me and my functionality with this spiritual aspiration, it's more like, God, I hope this stuff is out there, and I hope I can engage it because I really need it because I'm screwed otherwise, because I'm hopeless, I'm a washout, and that turns out to actually be a very powerful perspective.
Thank you.
Sure.
What I'm hearing too is when you're talking about this is tracking the edges of that impermanence is also a way to practice perhaps.
Oh, absolutely.
Just really noticing that we are actually amazing and really pathetic.
Yeah.
Both,
Exactly, sure.
Kind of being able to watch the noticing of watching how we're framing it and how we're reframing it.
Yeah, a really good way to approach this. This is a reality check. This is about getting real. So you completely own everything. So you own your personal modes, you own your neuroses, you own your everything, and you also own the actuality of your experience, which is present, which is astounding and bizarre, and exists in it is the same context within which all the other stuff that we can maybe specify exists. So you unify the whole thing. It's just like a reality check. Yeah, it's all here. It's all just the way it is, exactly. Doesn't need to be spin doctored or justified or anything. And then you have just this astounding spectrum that goes from this, this pathetic, neurotic, mediocre human being, all the way this continual spectrum to absolute, inconceivable, transcendent infinity beyond space and time. And it's all right here, right now. It's all this. And there's no either or in it. There's no this or that. There's no winning or losing. And in that, the noticing becomes so much more accessible because it's, again, you're stepping outside of polarizing. And polarizing is a hallmark of frame of reference. A hallmark of frame of reference is any this that can be different from any that. In reality, there's no such thing. In reality, reality is an infinite continuum. Reality is infinitely differentiated from itself and always exactly the same as itself, which is completely irrational and paradoxical and literally true. For example, for example, that one statement to illustrate it, your field of vision right now, every single pixel, let's say, not that it's pixelated, but every single point in your field of vision is seeing a different light intensity and a different color in real time always. So it's infinitely differentiated, and yet it's one thing. It's just vision, just the field of vision. So it's infinitely differentiated, and yet exactly one thing. And no part of this differentiation departs from being just vision.
So this is something that I've been playing with, like field of vision, the area of focus.
Yeah.
And so I've been with different senses of taste, sight, trying to not cling to one, trying to stretch the boundaries. When I do that, though, I like when I'm having tea, I notice if I'm drinking it from this sort of more open, I don't taste it as well. And so then I wonder, is something wrong? It's not as enjoyable.
Right.
As I'm
Well,
really
yeah.
focusing on the
But this illustrates a very good principle in all of this. The very nature of experience is it tends to present itself as continuum of degrees of focus. So experience always shows up, and this is the essence of the whole mandala principle. Experience always shows up with a virtual centralization of attention, with a gradual gradation to the edges of indeterminacy within any and all experiential fields, and across the experiential fields as well. Now, the mistake is to assume that because something is in focus, it's more important or it's more relevant. It's all equal. Sharp and fuzzy are equal value. Fuzzy is really present fuzzy, and sharp is really present sharp. And again, in terms of our unconscious normalcy frame of reference, we used to thinking, well, sharp is more relevant, more, if I'm looking at it, that's more important, but I'm not looking at it, I have to look at it, and all of a sudden it becomes important. But it's not like that. And when you get that the whole field is important, it's just that sharpness is one mode of that importance, and fuzziness is other, degrees of fuzziness is other modes of that importance. And so you get to the very edge where it's essentially absolute indeterminacy, but that's equally important too. And all of a sudden, things can kind of open up.
So perhaps rather than devaluing the focus part, which is what I feel like I've been doing.
Yeah. Well, don't value or devalue any of it. Presence is presence, and presence is value. And presence is equally present whether it's in a point of focus or outside of a point of focus. This is, in my field of vision, this is just exactly as present as this. But this is present as a sharp focus, this is present as a relatively indeterminate fuzziness, but it's the same presence. This is not less present. It's just present with a different degree of apparent integration or whatever. I mean, I qualify it any old way. But it's a mistake to assume that implies anything. The powerful fact is presence. The powerful fact is actuality. And actuality is the same. Any actuality is the same as all actuality. This is part and parcel of frames of reference as we prioritize qualities of experience as more or less important, more or less relevant, more or less actual. And in actual fact, any presence is actuality, the same. I don't know what the implications would be in terms of your art and the exercises we go to it.
Perfect, is exactly it. That's great. And not just that, but everything.
So, as a result, focus is fine. So if you want to focus on something, feel free. If you want to taste your tea, focus on it. But if you're not focused on it, it's not any less present. It's just present in a different way, let's say, with a different...
I had this idea that doing that was kind of trying to stretch the, in my quest to become enlightened.
No, one way to look at it, it's not literally true, but it's approximately interesting, is you can be in this any old which way, anywhere, any way you possibly can, and it's always the same. So you have freedom to be with it however it's convenient, and you're not gaining or losing anything by being with it one way or another way. So if you want to focus on something, if it's convenient to you or interesting to you for some reason, by all means feel free to do so. You're not losing anything by not focusing on it, and you're not gaining anything by focusing on whatever you focus on. And then you can change your mind and focus somewhere else. So you have freedom to be with it any which way, and you're not actually gaining or losing anything. It's not like, oh, I missed it. I wasn't focusing on it.
Right.
Peter?
Yes.
I've been sort of working with noticing, thinking about noticing, and I see sometimes like I have something going on in my head about what's supposedly going on with me, and then all of a sudden, sometimes I change that and I see, hey, this is actually happening. This being is actually happening here. Where the hell did it come from? This is like amazing.
Yeah.
That's a kind of a macro kind of noticing,
Sure.
not so much as squiggle noticing or
Yeah.
But that's a form of noticing too.
Absolutely. I mean, if you can notice being itself, if you can notice the miracle of presence, that this is actually here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing. It's inconceivable. Right away you're completely beyond anything you can wrap your head around, right? It's just so obviously, wow.
Yeah. It's so easy not to see that.
Sure.
Yeah. Now it's like see, wow.
Yeah. I mean, how could experience be happening? How could this be happening? How could you exist? How could this? I mean, usually it's just well, of course I exist. What's going on? And then we cut right to the drama, to the soap opera. But wait a minute. Back up a little bit. This is here. How can experience be here? I mean, it's complete. Try and do that in your home chemistry set or in your shop. It's like churn out some actuality.
How did I not see that for so long?
Yeah, no, sure. We started to talk about something. I don't know if
just the last time that I was here, you spoke about when you're in a dilemma. Yes, there's the dilemma, and there's a lot more going on.
Right, yeah.
And that has been extremely helpful at times when it's been fun. When I've been angry or pissed, and then I'll think, oh, and my fingers are tingling, and there are jonquils coming up. Or I'm really enjoying the weather, and I'll think, and my ass hurts, and it's just such an infinite array.
Yeah, and more than that, and more than that, and more than that, and more than that, forever, every instant. Yeah. No, the startling fact is infinity is an actuality. This is infinity. It's literally and accessibly and engageably an infinity. Infinity is not some abstraction, that mathematicians play with. Infinity is the very nature of actually everything and anything.
I think another important point that I took from what you said before and that I've continued to experience is it's not remedial.
Right.
It's not fixing feeling shitty, or it's not fixing feeling high. It's just
and yet paradoxically it does fix it.
Yeah.
But it's so much more. So much more than just the mode of noticing is just feeling. Just feel presence. And feel the way presence presents itself. Any way it is. Because experience is infinitely textural. And don't worry about what that means. Don't try and sort out what does textural mean. But just because you don't need to know what it means for it to be obvious. So the point is to just feel the textuality of experience. And just that simple engagement, which in fact is already always completely happening, is completely transforming. That's the very essence of inherent yoga. It's just feeling the texture of experience. Feeling the texture of experience immediately and profoundly and ultimately reveals the transcendental nature of what this is. Which completely invalidates the absurd limitation implied by our frames of reference and our normal self-definitions and our normal definitions of what is going on.
This is a little bit about
Mm-hmm. Well, that's hard to describe, because feeling is something that you can do, but doesn't, again, it's irrational. I would say feeling is direct energy engagement. Feeling is consciousness absolutely intimately experiencing an energy flavor or an experiential characteristic. So taste is feeling. Seeing is actually feeling. If actually consciousness is feeling light when you see something. Hearing is feeling sound energy. Sound energy is appearing within consciousness. And consciousness, when sound appears within consciousness, it's not like consciousness is over here and sound is over here. The apparition of the sound is a complete intimate unity, a complete marriage of sound/consciousness as one gestalt. And all experience is of that nature. And so it's an absolute intimate feeling. It's like an eternal yin-yang, as any experiential characteristic. And to try and isolate experiential characteristics as being individuated or separate is of course absurd. And yet the experiential manifold presents as infinitely differentiated, so you can find as many apparently differentiable characteristics as you care to, but you can't actually isolate them because they don't resolve into a coherence or separation. They are part of a continuum of everything. Everything comes with anything, you could say. And yet, it's all experienced already. It's not something you need to do. It's noticing is an appropriate word, but it's a matter of noticing the actual fact where we are. This complete intimate engagement of consciousness with experiential characteristics. I mean, that's how you know an experiential characteristic is appearing, is because consciousness is completely intimately engaged with it, or you wouldn't experience it. That's what experience is. And so noticing this is noticing that experience is a textural engagement, a textural feeling, a textural embrace of consciousness with some energy flavor, or experiential characteristic, what have you. I mean, there's no language for this stuff, so you've got a kind of this euphemism. And then experience is just this ongoing hug, where the consciousness is just hugging this infinite rainbows of energy flavors and experiential characteristics that are continually morphing and dancing. And if that doesn't feel like wow, you're not paying attention. And again, in actual practice, you find yourself drifting in and out of this noticing of this amazing textual presence, and then you'll drift off into your stuff, and then you occasionally will drift back into it, noticing it more prominently, and then you'll drift off. And that's all, just the ease of that flow, the spontaneity of that flow is its very most efficient mode. So not trying to do this or engaging with this intentionally or purposefully, just letting it be. Just let it be what it is. Noticing is a really appropriate word, because you're not actually doing anything. You're just noticing the way it already actually is. And even when it's not happening, you're noticing it's not happening, and you're qualifying it as not happening. But then when it's happening, you're noticing that it's happening. But then you look back at when you're noticing it wasn't happening, and you're noticing it's actually the same thing. And after a while, your noticing gets sophisticated, and you begin to notice, wow, even when I'm lost in all my bullshit, I am in completely transcendental energy, direct energy engagement with inconceivability. But how can that happen? What's that made of? And all of this just, the whole house of cards of our shitty lives just collapses or is rendered as irrelevant.
One thing you often say, and I'll quote it here, is when you comment on it, you say, aspiring denies the actuality.
Say that again?
Aspiring denies the actuality.
I said that? Wow. That's profound.
And here we are all aspiring right now. That's why we're here.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, actuality, what is actually present is what's powerful, and what's actually present is the only thing that's powerful. So trying to find something else that you imagine will be powerful or you know, efficacious or in some sense desirable is removing yourself from being with the actuality that is present, that which is where the true power is and the true revelation is. And yet, paradoxically, when aspiration is present, it is present, and the way in which it is present is itself transcendental and revelatory. So it's all very paradoxical. But basically, you know, the real power is whatever happens to be exactly as it happens to be right here, right now. You know, just actuality. Actuality is absolute. Is absolute infinite spiritual revelation, just actuality. Not any particular actuality, just this actuality. And it's always exactly this actuality. It always looks different, but it's always this, right here, right there. And that's where the juice is, that's where the power is. And that's where noticing happens. And that's where not noticing happens, and yet when you get more skilled at noticing, you begin to notice, as I mentioned, that even not noticing isn't noticing, because it's the same thing. It's not like that's happening somewhere else, made of something else. It's not like you leave some world and go to some other world.
Or like you're noticing, you're noticing, and then the thought comes in. Well, I wasn't noticing, but the thought arose.
Sure.
Doing the same thing.
Of course. The thought is itself a transcendental energy presence that is felt by complete transcendental energy engagement. Whatever that means. When you try to talk about the indescribable, you have to start making up words and pretending they actually refer to anything. Occupational hazard.
Couldn't you say that too about aspiring? Like,
Absolutely.
Are we really aspiring
Absolutely.
to anything? We're just somehow got in our car or walked over here, or somehow ended up here.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here.
Yeah, I mean, how did this happen? I mean, that's always a great question. It's like, why am I here? And if you're really honest, you can't answer that question. It's like,
or even how did I get
yeah,
here?
or where am I? What is here? What's going on here? You know, any of these questions, any question you ask honestly has no answer you can ultimately find. You know, and that's kind of fun when you really see it. It turns out to be good news.
Like nothing can be excluded in this experience. Nothing is excluded.
Of course, if it's being experienced, it is transcendental radiant presence. It is reality.
So there's no going for any one thing.
Yeah.
And even if you try, one thing you said was the idea of swallowing. It just seems like that swallows up every experience.
Sure.
There isn't any one moment.
Yeah. You ultimately
it's all over before you.
Yeah, you ultimately come to appreciate the absolute inclusiveness of this. You know, but again, the trick is not that is the case. The trick is recognizing that is the case. It enables appreciation that is the case, which also enables you to appreciate what it actually is, which is so astoundingly beyond what we're used to thinking we are and it is. And that's the joy of it. That's the liberating aspect of it.
That's the wow.
Yeah. And because it's the wow of this, it's the wow of me, it's the wow of what this is, what I am, which turns out to be a real hell of a wow. And that's it's kind of nice compared to the much less than a wow that I'm maybe used to thinking I am. Erroneously.
With chronic pain, I had a back surgery and chronic pain for a long time, and I kind of got into that whole woe is me, sleep deprived or uncomfortable. and I've had a cranial practitioner who said, well, what if you just start noticing the pain into the pain, the beat, the contractions, and my pain, stop feeling pain.
Yeah.
And it was freaking me out, because then I started to explore the sensation of pain and think,
Yeah.
I don't even think it's good. You know, and then I started, I was off the pain, which is very good, but like, am I, getting a little wacky here? I had this whole constructed
Yeah.
putting me in pain, and it was like, it's hot, it's this, it's not
Sure.
this other thing.
Yeah. Pain is a complete trip. Pain is completely bizarre if you let yourself look at it. It's only pain if you don't let yourself look at it. If you hold it away and it's pain, go away, I hate it, I'm in pain, life sucks, blah, blah, blah. But you're not letting yourself be with what's actually there. If you feel what's actually there, it's this inconceivable rainbow of weirdness. I mean, it's just too weird it's just too weird. There's weirdness beyond weirdness. And at that point, where'd the pain go? It's not that it disappears, it's just that there's no it to disappear, it's just weirdness. And of course, the message here is all experience is exactly like that. All experience is exactly like that. All experience is weirdness beyond weirdness. But most people are in the habit of not letting themselves be with what the experience actually is. We think we know what it is and hold it over there. Oh, it's pain, it's over there. Oh, it's my life, it's over there. Oh, it's this person I'm talking to, they're over there. And so we sort of, in that distance, it solidifies it into a caricature, as opposed to being with the actual living presence, which is incredibly bizarre. Just astounding. Really obviously so, really excessively. And that turns out, of course, to be just delightful. That's so available. I mean, this illustrates another aspect of what's surprising about spirituality. When we're naive about spirituality, people who are sort of relative newcomers to spirituality think of it as some kind of escapism. I'm supposed to fuzz out, I'm supposed to get vague, I'm supposed to somehow leave this and find some transcendence over there. But it's exactly the opposite that's true. It's in the specifics, it's in the actual specific naked presence that transcendence is found. That's where the true transcendence is found. That's where the true amazingness is found. And it's very counterintuitive to the sort of naive mindset of this sort of escapist fantasy of to float away to Never Land somewhere over there and get away from all the shit. It's actually the opposite. You go to the shit, you go through the shit, and you find heaven. It's counterintuitive to a naive way of thinking of it, but it's literally true. Any experience completely transcends whatever you may be used to thinking it is. It is something absolutely astounding. In a really obvious and explicit way. It's almost noon. Why don't we knock off for lunch? We can take about an hour-ish. And try to, when do we have to knock off today? Like about 2:30 or something?
Yeah, that's right, yeah, 2:30.
So the earlier we can reconvene, the longer we can go on, unless you're getting numb, which I quite understand. Numb or dizzy. But there's a bunch of lunch places around. Anyone that doesn't know any specifics, we can consult with each other, and Peter knows a few places around. I know there's an Italian pizza-ish place a couple blocks out away.
Stone Way, there's
A block over that way and a block up that way.
a lot of places down 45th too, old restaurants.
Down 45th, okay. But anyway, if we can try and reconvene in roughly an hour, then we can get in some more time if you'd like that. Since we're knocking off for an hour, I'm going to quit the video, and I'll be back an hour from now, approximately at 1 o'clock Pacific time. Okay. So welcome back. I hope you had a nice lunch. One very simple way of understanding this yaka is a very, very simple way of putting this yoga is this yoga consists of feeling experience itself, feeling experiencing. The normal human mode is to relate to conditions that appear in experience, as if experience was a clear window within which things were appearing, and we're not interested in the window, we're interested in what's appearing. Or as if experience was a doorway that we walk through, and we're interested in what's on the other side of the doorway. We're not all interested in the doorway itself. And it turns out that this is a big mistake, because the real fact of experience is not what it looks like, but the experience itself, which typically we don't give any attention to at all. We take completely for granted. Well, of course, experience is here, but what's happening? What's going on? What is the action? What's in it for me? What's my participation? As opposed to, wait a minute, hold the phone. Just what is it? What is this that's here? And it turns out that if you just gently approach experience as a thing, rather than just an abstract given that things appear in, experience is a thing. In fact, experience is the only thing. And the apparent things that appear in experience are simply experience itself appearing that way. Very much the way that the apparent things that appear in a dream are not actually there. The only thing that's there is dreaming. Dreaming is the only thing that's actually there when you're dreaming a dream, of course. And yet, typically we don't recognize the dreaming. We recognize that the apparent objects and conditions and entities within the dream that we find interesting and interact with. But we don't notice the dreaming itself, and yet when we do, this amazing phenomena happens that we call a lucid dream. And likewise, when one notices experience itself as the condition that is actually present, a very amazing condition occurs, which is called realization. This is actually fairly easy to do. We typically don't do it, not because it's hard to do, but because typically we're so addicted to our investment in the importance of our relationship with the apparent entities and situation and characters in our experience, that we get distracted from experience itself, which seems relatively neutral and vanilla, and who cares about it because there's nothing going on, to the exciting content of what seems to be occurring. I often say reality is very easy to find, but unreality is very hard to let go of. So the challenge is not finding reality, the challenge is not seeing reality, the challenge is letting go of unreality, because it's our addiction typically to our investment in the storyline, in the content, in the exciting ups and downs of our soap opera that we're the star of course, that distracts us from noticing the fact of this experience. And also, this is that very addiction, that very attachment to all of the apparent events occurring within experience, rather than experience itself, is the very thing that prevents realization, that prevents noticing what experience is. Because what experience turns out to be is so radically and fundamentally different than the characteristics and qualities we attribute to the things and entities going on within experience. Very much like a lucid dream, when you're dreaming and I expect many or most of you, perhaps even all of you, have experienced a lucid dream, right? I mean, what a difference! It's like, oh wow, this is a dream. I'm dreaming, because before that you're thinking, oh, I'm in this situation and I'm all caught up in it and this, that, and the other, right? The usual. We're all very familiar, I suppose, with being lost in the dream as usual. But then, and when that moment of lucidity happens, and all of a sudden, what a shift of perspective. It's like, wow, this is a dream. None of this matters. It's just a dream. And all of a sudden, you're free to play around with it or laugh at it. But there's an amazing feeling of freedom and liberation and joy that comes with this discovery. And no surprise, exactly the same thing happens when the analogous discovery is made in the waking state, which is called realization. Realization is not a glorified term. It's not a special thing. It's simply realizing what this actually is. Coming to realize it, coming to appreciate it, coming to notice it. And it's always here and always noticeable. So the very simple sort of a stance or orientation of notice experience itself. Just what is experience? Feel what experience is. Experience is right here. It feels like something. It actually has a characteristic, very subtle characteristic, maybe. And yet all gross characteristics that appear within experience are experience too, nothing but. So experience is palpable, it's qualitative, it's not just a nothing, it's not just an abstraction. On the contrary, it is supremely concrete. It is your very actuality. The actuality of everything that you experience as actual is actually the actuality of experience. Experience is a thing. And feeling this thing that we call experience is revelatory because again, the quality, the nature of what this is so astounding relative to the nature of the things that we think are things we think to be.
Do you draw a distinction between, or do you think there is a distinction between realization and liberation?
Nope, they're one and the same. Liberation is just the implication of realization, because with realization, i.e., a direct, immediate, visceral, self-verifying discovery of what this actually is, what you actually are, you are spontaneously and inherently liberated from apparent entrapment in what you have thought it to be, which is discovered to be non-existent in the way you thought it to be existing. So the liberation is liberation from, it's basically liberation from error, liberation from fantasy. Not liberation from fantasy as a condition, but liberation from being trapped in mistaking fantasy for actuality. I mean, it's the classic rope and the snake. You know, when you realize this, it's not a snake, it's a rope, you are liberated from any threat from the snake. You know, it's very simple. So it's sort of glorified in these, you know, liberation, realization, enlightenment. You know, these fabulous phrases that are like the pinnacle on the lofty mountaintop that we can aspire to for 100,000 lifetimes and all this stuff. But in actuality, it's much, much simpler than that. It's simply what's going on here is really bizarre, and if you let yourself notice how bizarre it is, you will realize what it is, because it's not hidden. It's actually, there's nothing concealing it. It's not behind anything. It's the only thing that's concealing it is its own unlikely, weird nature, which is only unlikely and weird by contrast with what we usually think of it as being, which is actually unlikely and weird because it's wholly non-existent. So it's all asked backwards. You know, it's a shame that it seems to be the case that realization is a slippery thing and it's difficult for people to come to, just estimating sort of statistically and numerically by looking around at the apparent condition of people. But, you know, it's a shame that it has been placed on such a high pedestal and glorified as, you know, the Buddha was realized and Jesus was realized and maybe a handful of people throughout history. But no, realization is actually normalcy. Realization is simply noticing this actual condition that is here. So, you know, even though it does seem to be elusive, it's not actually special. I mean, it's special because the nature of what it happens to be is astounding, but it's actually the normal condition. It's the only condition you have ever known. And realizing what it is, appreciating what it is, or more accurately, just feeling what it is as it actually is all that realization is. And so it's a very simple, present actuality, completely available. Again, realization, you know, experience of reality is very easy, but letting go of unreality is hard. You know, the mind keeps snapping back to its attachment. You know, our investment in the soap opera, we're so excited to see what the next episode's going to bring, you know. What will become of our stars? Namely me, right? Or you in your case. But this is very simple, just you can play with it sometimes. Just imagine or assume the experience is a thing and yet it actually has a quality that is feelable, that is palpable, that is knowable in some way, maybe subtly, but whatever. Just imagine that, and then just try and do it. Like feel experience, rather than feeling any particular experience or anything. Just feel experience itself. What does experience feel like? Well, here it is. This is experience. What's it feel like? And you may find this interesting experience.
I have a stupid question.
I'll give you a stupid answer.
Okay. Was the world here before you were born?
Well, there is no world, there's only me. So the answer is yes. But the world looked like my unborn condition of experience, which of course is not translatable into words or even rememberable because it doesn't translate into waking language at all. Yeah, there's only one being, which is your being, in your case, which exists beyond space and time, so it exists eternally. And any and every seeming world that appears within it as aspects of your experience.
It's the meta world there. It's the hyper world.
Well, yeah, but it's actually the only world,
Yeah.
because the virtual world that's appearing is not an actual world. It seems to be a world, but it's only a virtual world. Like a dream seems to be a world, but it's not an actual world, it's just a virtual world. There's not actually anything there. I mean, you can have the most elaborate dreams and they can be most realistic and detailed. And when you wake up, you look back and you think, there's nothing there, it's just a dream. And when you go to sleep, where's this world gone? How's it any different? When you go to sleep, this world is just like shut off like it never was. And in fact, as far as you're concerned, you don't know if it ever was because you don't care because you're asleep.
Yeah, I find it amazing because when you're in a dream, you actually have memories within that dream of the actual experience and you can relate.
Oh yeah, dreams can have instant backstory. Yeah, you can find yourself in a dream and you've been in that world for 30 years. Retroactively. Just from right? No, it's astounding. This can happen, right? And the same thing happens now. If I ask you now, well, yeah, I remember my whole life. I've been here for 60-some years and blah, 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 blah. But there's only right now. It seems as if that's true. I can't prove it. What is memory? How does memory work? It's very strange and very slippery. It's not that it's not any particular way or is any particular way. It's just that it's a big question mark. It's a big unknown. And that unknownness is not some failure of seeing it clearly. That unknownness is what it is. It's not resolvable as this or that.
It seems like memory is also like how you were saying, here's where I'm focused, but also there's this over here. It also just has a flavor in presence.
Sure, exactly. And the flavor in presence, which is always presence. Right? And the flavor of a particular memory may be, the so-called particular memory may be different in the next instant that you so-called remember it. I mean, memory is basically...
There's an overall flavor called memory.
Yeah.
And then there's like the subtlety of it, like, oh, bad memory, good memory.
Yeah, all that.
Yeah.
I mean, and this gets into, trying to analyze or distinguish the different bandwidths of experience, which again is very obvious but very subtle. But, it's completely obvious, vision from sound. You don't mistake what you're seeing from what you're hearing usually, I assume. Because they have very different textures. Vision has a particular texture that we may call, light or seeing light or what have you. And hearing has a specific texture that we may call hearing sound or whatever, right? And yet, if you look very closely at them, they are ultimately the same. They're sort of little scintillations in the instant. You know, I mean, and again, you can't, of course, you can't resolve exactly what it is because it's unresolvable. But it's a kind of a little vibration or pulsation or scintillation or something in the moment. And, you know, vision is that, the presence of light is that, the presence of sound is that, the presence of sensation is that. You know, sensation is like a tingling that's happening right now, right? And what is the tingling? If you close your eyes and feel, what is feeling? What is touch? You know, it's like a sparkling. I can't say obviously literally, but it's a liveliness that happens in the moment instantaneously, discontinuously. You know, it's vibratory. It's dynamic. And the same with hearing. If you with sound, you know, if you close your eyes and listen to an air conditioner or something that's just sort of continuous, what is it? And you get this kind of an instantaneous dynamism in the present moment of some energy presence, you know, which has a texture that's immediately recognizable as what we think of as sound, and the same as sensation. But they're ultimately the same. They're ultimately a sort of a dynamism, an energetic dynamism experientially in the moment. And light's the same thing. Light, of course, is, you know, you might say it's really much higher frequency or with a finer texture, perhaps, than, say, sound or the sense of feeling. But it's sort of a different part of the bandwidth of the same thing. The same with thought. You look what thought is. Well, thought, you know, what is thought? The thought is the texture of thought is very subtle. But it does have a texture. You know you're thinking because something that we may think of as thought is present. There's some experience that's being experienced, right? That is thought. So thought is some energetic experiential presence, just like vision or sound is, you know, energetic experiential presence, right? But the texture of thought is, you know, is very fine. And of course, memory and imagination are similarly fine, perhaps the same, perhaps different, you know, you split hairs with it, but that's not really important. But they're all, basically, they all happen exactly now. They're all complete real-time presences, right? They're all instantaneous, and they're all absolutely dynamic. So memory is, you know, present energy, present experiential energy. Thought is present experiential energy. Vision is present experiential energy. Touch is present experiential energy, so on and so forth. Interesting. Where's the energy coming from? Where's it appearing? I mean, these questions don't have answers. They're more in the nature of koans. But they're not actually mysterious in a way because the energy is happening right here. It's completely accessible. You know, it's not like, you know, vision is happening somewhere over there and I can't quite make it accurate. No, vision is right here. I mean, it's up close and personal.
Including when it's at a distance and you can't quite make it out.
Well, it may be at a distance, but you're experiencing it here.
Yeah.
You may see the moon way over there, but where you're seeing the moon is here, in your experience. So there's nothing but here, experientially, because it's impossible to have an experience anywhere other than here. Of course, exactly what here is ends up including the whole of reality, but here turns out to be the whole of reality. The whole of reality is here, the whole of reality is you, the whole of reality is this experiential field, which is what you are. You know, it's what doesn't come and go. What it looks like comes and goes, but it itself doesn't come and go, right? The experiential field does not, you know, it has no dynamism, even though what appears within it instantaneously is absolutely dynamic, right? So, you know, playing with this stuff is not from the point of view of trying to pin it down, but looking at it really closely, it reveals how weird it is, how strange it is, how amazing it is. And it's completely actual. None of this stuff is abstract, you know. I mean, the words, you know, we're talking about it, so the words themselves are abstractions and so on and so forth. But we're talking about something very specifically that is right here, right now, very actual, very present. And this presence is right here. It's completely obvious. It can be investigated very, very closely. Of course, it's very strange because when you get close to it, the closer you look, the weirder it seems to get. It's like a mirage, the closer you get to a mirage, at a distance a mirage just looks like a little bit of water or whatever it looks like, right? And you start to get closer and all of a sudden it's just, what's going on? What's happening? And all of a sudden you can't find it. And of course experience is like that. Experience is very weird. You heard me earlier refer to it as being unresolvable, and this is what it means. It means that the closer you look at something, the less it looks like anything in particular. It doesn't exactly disappear, but it morphs and opens into otherness. What it seems to be from afar, the more intimately you're with it, the more it will seem to be something else. Like we were talking about with pain earlier. Like pain, if you're sort of at a distance, it's, oh, it hurts, But if you really, well, okay, what is this that's here that I'm calling pain? What is this that's here that I'm saying ow about? And you go into what's actually experientially present, and the closer you get to it, so to speak, and you can't say exactly what that means, but the closer you get to it, the more intimate you are with it, the weirder it is discovered to be. Until eventually, it's not even pain anymore. It doesn't actually disappear, but it just, it just morphs, and then you get closer to it, and it morphs some more, and you get closer, and it morphs some more. Endlessly. So this is what I mean by unresolvability.
You can use the word otherness in that context of that.
Yeah.
Is there really an otherness here? Or they're just a seeming?
It's all seemings, of course. Otherness refers to that whatever something seems to be, it's also, if you look closely, it's also more than that, and it's also other than that. It's more in that it's kind of the same, only even more so, and it's other in the sense that it's actually even completely different than your original jumping off point. So when you go into anything, you find it's more than that, and also even other than that. So more and other. Investigation reveals more and other. And if you go into the more and other, you find more and other, of course. So you can just go on forever exploring anything, and you end up with everything. Or nothing. What's the difference?
I was thinking about the pain example, and when it comes to physical pain, that seems in some way really easier to track on a sensate level.
Yes.
But when it's emotional pain, psychological pain, it seems more amorphous or tricky.
Yes.
Because now you're in concepts and maybe language. Could you say anything about that? Because I'm sure as a principle the same with the
The challenge with emotional type pain, or for example, as compared with physical pain, typically, is emotional pain is typically a gestalt of a lot of different things at once. I mean, physical pain is generally pretty specifically kind of one thing, or at least one locus. You have a point of focus with it. Whereas emotional pain is usually more multidimensional, more explicitly multidimensional, and involves a lot of different things, sort of association or a gestalt of a lot of different things that don't really have much to do with each other. So it may involve, obviously it involves emotional reaction, but the emotional reaction may be to sort of subtly or even unconsciously held ideas or narratives, and so on and so forth. So it's not a single thing in the sense that a physical pain is more of a single thing, at least as your starting point. Emotional pain is typically a whole rat's nest of associations, and you need to really be assiduous to sort of try and track down all the elements that are contributing. That's kind of what I imagine. That's kind of what psychotherapists do and all that in their work. Is to sort of pull on the different associative strands that are associated with, a symptom of, gosh, I feel bad, and then like, well, why do you feel bad? And then you sort of pull on all these strings and you discover, this sort of spider web of association or whatever.
So as a noticing exercise or a noticing experience,
Right.
Is that too complicated?
Yeah, well, it may or may not be. The whole trick with noticing from a practical point of view is do it where it's easy. Don't do it where it's hard. It's not like you need to set the bar higher. On the contrary, set the bar lower. You know, do noticing where it's easiest to do, and just that will automatically translate everywhere else. It's not like you need to do noticing in some place and then do noticing someplace else and do it serially so you accumulate, build up noticing in all these different areas. It's so much simpler than that. Any genuine noticing done anywhere in experience automatically translates to the whole of experience. It's so wonderful. It's like to sink a boat, you don't need to punch out every board, you just need to put one hole anywhere, and the boat's going down sooner or later.
Dramatically true love and spontaneous noticing, like we notice the sound of the birds.
Yeah.
And then you are just in it, and then you're aware that you're noticing. Might that be true on an emotional level, that it spontaneously occurs where you're noticing?
Absolutely. Noticing can happen anywhere, and anywhere it happens, it's vital and transformative. But typically, typically noticing in a more challenging, again, it depends on your temperament. Everyone's unique. I mean, this is another fallacy about people, well, we're all basically the same. I mean, in a fundamental sense, maybe we're all the same, but in specifics, we're all entirely different. Everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, different talents, different, blind spots, and so on and so forth. So the challenge of each of us individually is to take advantage of our strengths and bypass our weak spots. Sort of individually tailored program. So you have to find out for yourself what works, what's good. But the nice thing, the easy thing the fortunate thing about noticing is, if you do it where it's easy for you, that's sufficient. So you don't need to worry about, God, I can't do noticing. Most of my experience, I can't do any noticing about it at all whatsoever. But if I listen to sounds, all of a sudden I'm gone. It's fabulous. It's like, cool, that's great, cool. That's all you need. That's all you need. And just that eventually translates and deconstructs the entirety of the confusion of frames of reference, orienting to frames of reference.
I find that's noticing happens a lot of times when you listen to music. It's a very easy way to open it up.
Yeah. Well, art is a phenomenon that the humans are very familiar with, that is specifically designed for noticing. Art is using form to reveal the transcendental. And any art that is effective art, is genuine art, to some extent you look at it and there's a wow factor. Right, and to whatever degree, and so on and so forth. That's the very nature of art. Art is humans spontaneously playing with this phenomenon of being outside of a frame of reference. Art that doesn't take you outside of a frame of reference to some degree, in actuality, is not art. It's just calling itself art. But effective art, forcibly. For me, example, I look at a Van Gogh or something. I'm just, wow, whoa, hold the phone, Stop the presses. It's just so blatant, it's palpably obvious that, wow, there's something astounding here.
But you can't say why or not.
Yeah, that's the point. And you can't say why. But it's not about why. It's about outside of rationality. It's about outside of explainability. And yet actuality, and yet vital, and nourishing, and exciting, and the life force, It's beautiful, it's moving, it's scary, but it's alive, not in any way that you can get a handle on. So it reveals transcendence in that way. It transcends making sense, it transcends getting any kind of handle on. But it's real, it's actual. And that's the very essence of noticing. All of this is the life force. It's the life force which is doing this, and the life force is wildly irrational, completely spontaneous, completely transcendental. It makes no sense. It's not being done by someone for some purpose. It's just bang. It's the Big Bang, you know. And here it is. Check it out. You know, feel it as it is. And all of our polite, you know, rational versions of what it is and what it's doing are completely missing the point. Because it isn't polite, it isn't rational, and what it's doing is completely inconceivable.
So going back to the art, it animates us or it takes us out of that noticing state, that density. And for me, something I'm curious about, because it goes back to what you were saying about it simply being directly what it is. Sometimes I choose, and I think I find it helpful, to animate myself. So animate kind of tension, generate kind of emotion, empathize with kind of energy. And yes, as you're saying, and I believe it's true, everything is already that animated presence. You don't have to try.
Right. But that doesn't preclude participation. That doesn't preclude animation, because participation and your efforts and your engagement is itself transcendental. I mean, how can you do that? Where does that come from? You know, the energy that we have, that we bring to any attempt or any enterprise, is itself what? Where does it come from? I mean, it's the life force. Again, it's our innate intelligence. It's our innate, vitality that is the fountain of all of that. So it's all good. I mean, there's nothing. It's like nothing is excluded. Nothing is off the table. It's all good. And the trick is just to be with it as it is, which is miraculous and amazing and beyond the bounds, beyond the pale, beyond making sense. Good try, Peter. A round of applause for Peter's wonderful try, if you enjoy it. I guess that's why I like it, right? And I'm such an egotist, aren't I?
What is that you're putting in there?
It's jaggery, Indian raw sugar.
Oh, like cheese.
It looks like cheese, but it doesn't taste like cheese.
When we were talking about art, I thought this, even poetry.
Oh, absolutely.
Wonderful poetry, which is words, it somehow transcends or plays with us in a way that we can't describe or understand how it moves us.
Yeah, it evokes the transcendental, it evokes the irrational. And that is the very essence of noticing. That's the very essence of contacting actuality as it is, getting outside of normalcy, of our frame of reference, of our typical, unconscious narrative of who we are and what's going on. Our explanations. It's outside our explanations. And yet it's actual, it's vital, it's real, it's exciting, right? It's palpable, it's nourishing.
And it's using language.
Yeah, anything, but any form whatsoever can reveal transcendence, because all forms are ultimately transcendental themselves. That's what they're made of. I mean, words, we think of words as being rational, but rationality is completely irrational. Where does rationality come from? Rationality is not a rational thing. Rationality, it wasn't dreamed into existence by rationality. On the contrary, it emerged spontaneously from irrationality, right? The life force is doing rationality. How does that happen? Trying to explain that, right? So even rationality is completely irrational.
You're playing an instrument. What was that?
It's called a sarangi, probably.
When you play that, are you approaching this or what? You playing a song and improvising? I'm just curious.
Improvising.
Improvising. Why do you play?
So I love it. Why do I love it? I don't know.
Really like having a doctor who's working with you. When you came back from lunch, I noticed that the art was completely different.
I know, right? They changed the pictures while we were gone.
New experience.
Yeah, and it is a new experience. You know, it's always a new experience. Experience is always new. You know, if you notice what you experience at any moment you've never experienced before, you could be looking at so-called the same thing you've looked at every day for the last 20 years, and yet your experience of it in this instant is unique. And not just slightly unique, but utterly and completely unique. And noticing that is noticing. It's completely obvious, right? When you let yourself notice, it's completely obvious that that's the case. I mean, that's how we can tell time is passing, right? It's not like we have to remind, oh gosh, it's time. Did time just stop? No, time's still passing. Okay. It's not like that. It's completely obvious that time's always passing. And the way we can tell that is because our experience is continually new every instant. Yeah. In perhaps subtle, but completely comprehensive ways. And again, you try the experiment of looking at your face in the mirror, or, I'm sure you've all heard me many times, look at a blank wall or a blank computer screen. If you can set your computer so it just displays white, that's a really great instance for noticing. You look at that, look at that for 20 seconds, let alone 5 minutes or a half hour, and again, you'll think someone dosed your tea with acid or something, because it's completely obvious. The whole thing is just dancing and alive and moving around and patterns coming up and colors and shapes, and you're just looking at a white screen. Look at a blank wall. You just glance at a blank wall for 5 seconds, and woo, there's all this little, it's just breathing. It's like talking to you. It's like it's completely obvious. But again, we don't let ourselves notice it because it's just a wall. It's just sitting there. It's not interesting. We're typically drawn to our attachment to what we, our normal soap opera, our normal narrative of what is happening that we care about, supposedly. And so we don't have time for this silliness. Which is a shame because we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because this silliness is where liberation is found. This silliness is where realization is found. And all of our exciting stories and soap operas are where suffering and entrapment are found. As usual, we have it all us backwards.
Well, isn't it all right to produce the soap operas as long as you know that that's what it is?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And even if you don't know that's what it is, it's all right. Nothing wrong with it. Yeah. It's just that there's liable to be a backlash of suffering and confusion and so on and so forth that comes from that. But if
you don't know what it is, sure.
Yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Realization is not better than unrealization. Right? Realization is not better than confusion, because they're actually the same state. Realization is just seeing what confusion is. It's not a cessation of confusion. Confusion never stops, because this is infinitely confusing. This is confusion.
Would you say there's still suffering with realization?
No, there's no suffering, but there is confusion. But suffering comes from thinking confusion is supposed to make sense. That's the frustration. I'm supposed to make sense of this. And it doesn't make any sense. When you get to, it doesn't make any sense because it doesn't make any sense. It's not coherent. All of a sudden it's very easy. It's like, okay, it doesn't need to make sense. And then you're off the hook, right? The suffering comes from thinking you have to deliver something. You have to come up with some product. You have to come up with some making that makes sense or achieve some wholeness or integration or something. And when you get to, it's all just weird, random, infinitely patterned noise, doesn't make any sense at all, it's like, oh, how nice. If it doesn't make sense, then I don't need to make sense of it, so I'm off the hook. I'm out to pasture. It's Miller time. Yeah.
Would you address, I know people have brought up the word awareness, realization, and awake. Is there a differentiation for you with that? People say, well, wait a second, okay, I can have all these experiences seem to happen, but what does that have to do with me waking up, which I know there is no me.
Right.
That's not even really my question, but how do you address that urge to wake up that people say?
Okay. First of all, awareness is a constant in the equation. Awareness is not a part of it. Awareness simply means present experience. Experience can't occur if there's not awareness. Yeah. In my lexicon, obviously you can define a word to mean anything you want it to mean. So awareness is a non-issue in all of this. Realization is coming, or you might call awakening. I don't like the term awakening particularly because it has a lot of implications that I think are unnecessarily oblique. I like the term realization simply because realization consists of realizing what this is, what it always has been and always will be. So it's not an actual change of condition so much as a coming to appreciate what the condition is in the way that it actually is, in contrast with the way we may have been mistakenly thinking it to be. So you're realizing what it is, as opposed to not realizing what it is and thinking it some other way, which is the condition of unrealization. Unrealization is the realization of a condition that is not actually the case, but may seem to be the case. Whereas realization is a realization of a condition that is actually the case, the way it actually is. Does that clarify it or not?
I think that's the confusion part.
Right. Well, it's all endlessly confusing. It's all very paradoxical. The whole thing is endlessly weird because the condition of realization and the condition of unrealization are actually the same condition. And yet the fact of realizing is profound and radical and very real. So how does that work? Well, again, you can't say how it works. The fact that, first of all, what's experiencing your experience and what's interpreting your experience is completely transcendental. It's not something that you are doing by doing. It's happening. Your experience is being seen, is being experienced. From where? By what? It's just a mysterious. It's happening. Somehow it's being experienced. It's being seen. It's being known. It's being felt. So what is feeling your experience and where all the analyzing and figuring out and thinking comes from is equally, you're not doing it on purpose. You didn't decide to wake up and think today. It's just bang, there it is. It shows up from nowhere, just like the knowing of experience shows up from nowhere. So it's essentially a transcendental presence. And likewise, what is being experienced is a transcendental presence. You didn't decide to put these particular colors and shapes in your field of vision and these particular sounds. They just bang, they're here, right? So the whole thing that's happening is completely transcendental. But this thing that is experiencing, this thing that's being experienced, which ultimately turned out to be the same. I mean, there's no reason to have a this and a that because it's a this. Has the proclivity to try and know itself, and it seems to have a proclivity to try and know itself erroneously, at least apparently. Maybe we could hypothesize that it's knowing itself immaturely. It's saying, well, here this is. I'm experiencing this. What is it that's happening? And so it makes a few best guesses, and maybe it jumps on those hypotheses and say, yeah, maybe it's that. Yeah, maybe it's that. Like that comedian used to say, yeah, that's it. You know, so it's, oh yeah, I get it. So I'm a body, and I'm in a body, and I'm experiencing through this body, and I'm experiencing a world that is outside me and that I'm in, and so on and so forth. And so the whole, whatever worldview, whatever frame of reference is in force, it happens to be the case, just sort of shows up as a best guess. Again, not being done by you. You didn't decide to try and interpret this. There's an innate urge or urgency or motivation for this to try to make sense of itself, for this to try to explore itself. This is very curious about itself. It shows up as your, what we call your curiosity, your interest in experience in your life and so on, your participation in your life. So all of this happens, and then it naively does this interpreting, and so then we have a worldview, and we have, a condition which, if from a spiritual point of view, could be called delusion, where it's giving it its best guess, and maybe pretty clever guesses, but they happen to be inaccurate. Okay? And then there can spontaneously occur a kind of maturing process where sooner or later, this transcendental principle that's seeing all this and this, trying to figure all this out, after sufficient evidence accumulates that, wait a minute, something screwed up here. I don't have this right. I'm missing the mark somehow. It can't be like this. And then it potentially has the opportunity to see itself more clearly, to come to itself more clearly. And when it finally recognizes itself, it's a lot like you. If you suppose you're walking down a street and you glance over to your side and you see a person walking there, and all of a sudden you recognize, oh, there's a mirror there, and I'm seeing myself. But there can be a moment before you recognize it's a mirror where you think it's just another person walking along, and then there comes a moment of recognition of, oh, that's me. And yet, after you've recognized that's me, you're seeing exactly the same thing as you're seeing before you recognized it was you. So what does this recognition consist of? It's subtle. It's not obvious. So likewise, what experience consists of when it's being misinterpreted through the naive best guesses of this amazing transcendental intelligence that's experiencing this, what's being experienced is exactly the same thing that's being experienced in realization. Because obviously the experience is experience. Here it is. It's never other than what it is. It's just what it is. And yet it's amenable to misinterpretation, and it is also amenable to seeing it as it is. And so realization just consists of the transition from being with it in the context of a misinterpretation, which I've been calling an interpretive frame of reference, and being with it as it is, which is no frame of reference other than letting actuality be its own frame of reference, which turns out to be essentially a non-frame of reference from the human point of view because it's so non-linear and irrational and infinite and so on. And how that happens is completely unfathomable, but how anything happens is completely unfathomable, so that's no surprise. We're dealing with transcendental conditions here. We're dealing with transcendental qualities. What is knowing your experience is completely transcendental. Right? How does it happen that your experience is being known right now? It's completely obvious. It's mundane and normal, right? But how does it happen? You can't answer that question, can you? It's miraculous. There's this astounding, inconceivable knowing principle. You may call it consciousness or awareness or whatever, but what it is and where it comes from, it's just, here it is. It's obvious, but it's inconceivable. And likewise, what is being known, all this incredible, patterning and characteristics that show up as experiential characteristics. Where's all this color coming from? Where's all these shapes coming from? You can't answer this question. It's completely obvious and self-evident. It's completely normal. And yet it's entirely transcendental. It's entirely indescribable, very obviously and explicitly. And in seeing the fact of that, the paucity of our descriptive frameworks becomes really obvious. And yet, why was I ever off the mark?
When we're making music, how are you choosing what comes next?
I don't know.
Well,
How do you choose, when you're talking, how do you choose what word comes next?
there's in communicating,
Yeah.
language has
Yeah.
rules and,
Yeah, but what you just said, you said, and if someone else was saying it, they would have said something different. Why did you say exactly what you said? Where did it come from? By what aesthetic scale did you choose to select this word instead of that? You choose the words that make sense to you to use in a context that seems to be meaningful, that seems to have a sufficient degree of coherence to be with your flow, your energy, your intention, whatever, right? But when you look closely at exactly what that is and how it happens, it's like, and likewise with music. I can say, well, I choose notes that, it makes sense to me for this note to follow that note in this context, but it's not like it makes sense in a sense that it can be justified or explained rationally. It feels right, it feels, there's an internal coherence in terms of me as the expressor to express it that way. And words are essentially the same way.
when you began with the music, were you with their scales, was there listening to?
Oh, sure, all that kind of stuff.
So there was a training period.
Sure.
But isn't there knowing too? Like that's an aspect of the whole thing. Is
Sure.
Like how would you, if you didn't know, how would you even know to ask the fundamental question?
Yeah.
How to start playing?
Sure. All process, all procedure, and all logic proceeds from and exists in a context that is non-procedural, illogical, and so on and so forth.
Well, and if you're listening to someone, keeping with the music analogy, that is a virtuoso musician,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know that? How do you know it? That's part of knowing.
Yes, it is.
It's
How do you know great art from dog shit? I mean, anyone, I assume, most anyone, or many people, let's say, could look at a mediocre painting and look at a masterpiece. I mean, something that's just totally obvious, jaw-droppingly like, oh my God, this knocks my socks off. And this, even if they wouldn't agree as to exactly which was which in every case, by and large, they'll notice, wow, there's something about this one. What is that? How does that happen? How does resonance of value happen? How does, what you might call virtuosity happen? How is it obvious? If it is obvious, and what's up with that in the whole thing? It's down to, if you wanted to try and analyze it, you could say it's down to complexity of resonance of patterning. You get an intricate patterning with enough self-referentiality that it implies an amazing, infinite, degree of harmoniousness, or at least interesting disharmony. Then all of a sudden that becomes more interesting than something that's just noise, maybe. But that's sort of trying to construct a logic of aesthetic. And it's an interesting question, but ultimately, again, you get to a certain point where you can't go any farther in your analysis, and the actuality is always beyond that. The actuality is always more than that. The real answer to that question is...
well, if I know.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure. We're faced with a very interesting situation that every and any term or condition that we use to analyze anything or describe anything or approach anything turns out not to exist as such. So sooner or later, if not right from the get-go, the whole enterprise is doomed. Because nothing actually exists as such. What anything actually is so far beyond any way you could put it as to render the way you're putting it completely absurd and essentially non-existent.
So if you know that, why suffer?
Exactly. If you know that, it's impossible to suffer. Because you'd have to find finite elements to build your suffering out of.
Which is easy enough to do.
If you can create finite elements, but since no finite elements actually exist, and you know that, you're kind of screwed unless you forget that no finite elements exist, which is exactly what happens in the case of suffering. You forget that, oh, this is all transcendental infinity, and you create limited finite elements, and you can create all kinds of suffering out of limited finite elements.
That's about the most positive, cheerful thing I've heard in 20 years.
If there's a way to use it to enhance tolerance, like, for example, religious tolerance, there's this way, I think, that so many times we see it play out in the polarization of people invested in their belief systems. And for those of us maybe who've blown out of a belief system, that oops, I was raised to believe this thing is not real, or whatever, on and on. But is there an accessible way that you might have experience with, where, you can kind of blow out some of those boundaries in a way that might diminish?
You mean for someone else?
Yeah.
No. I mean, not on demand. I mean, that's kind of what we're playing with doing here. And yet the degree to which it works is not predictable. It's kind of an art form, and it's a dance, and it depends on skillful participation of the participants. So it can happen, yeah, but not predictably, not on demand.
Not in a way that's facilitatable.
Well, it may or may not be facilitatable, but again, not just by wanting it to be.
Yeah.
It can possibly be facilitatable, but you don't know until you try.
Right. So
You never know who's going to hear this until you try and you see who hears it, and how deeply they hear it. And if they hear it deeply, they'll get it, and if they get it, then all these religious discriminations and all this seem to be obviously childish, game playing, which is wholly fantastic and irrelevant. Well, it's more than just skillful means. I mean, it amounts to what skillful means really is, but it depends on the maturity of the individual. You can't hear this stuff until you're ready to hear it, and you can't be ready to hear it just because you want to be ready to hear it, or someone else wants you to be ready to hear it. You're ready when you're really ready. It's like the trees bear their fruit or bear their flowers when they do, not just when you want them to. Now, maybe through skillful means you can kind of force it one way or the other, but still in all, it's up to the tree to do the doing. So likewise, I mean, this is kind of my art form in a way, this sort of playing with, doing the spiritual dance with people, playing with seeing how far we can go on a kind of a one-to-one basis. I mean, like in a group, it seems like there's this whole group here, but in actuality, it's all one-to-one, or just actually one. But you could describe it as one-to-one in a way, and everyone individually gets what they're ready to get, and that's unpredictable. And there is an art form of skill involved. There is an art form of a dance involved, but it's all more of an art form than a science. So it's you can't. It's unpredictable. But it ultimately gets down to maturity and readiness, and that's again not something that can be contrived very easily. Which is why the uselessness of proselytizing. I mean, someone could tell this stuff to just like on the street corner, but most people are going to walk by and think you're a wacko, right? Because they're just not going to hear it. It's not going to connect with them at all.
And sometimes it feels like there's a field, and in a way a field can be primed so that when people enter it, that maybe there's more potentiality.
Maybe so. Really maybe so. But again, it's always one-to-one. It's always the individual that gets it. It's never a group that gets it. Even if a group of individuals get it, they're each getting it individually, kind of.
Yeah, I was thinking that that there's actuality, but everyone's actuality seems to be different.
Exactly. Everyone has this in their own actuality.
And so, I guess it was last night I was thinking about the nature of words per se. It's like a word is not the thing, and it's an abstract, of the word table is not the table, and if I use a pronoun to describe the table instead of a noun, that's a further abstraction. And so any words you use can only communicate if the other person has a similar idea of what the words are that you're using. And so it's like fun if you look at it in those terms, but at the same time it can be very frustrating for a person who says, well, this can only have one meaning, right?
Of course. And yet what happens like in a context like this is very interesting because there's much more occurring than strictly verbal communication. I mean, there's a whole energy dance, maybe, all kinds of subtle resonances and interconnections and vibes and who knows what that are part and parcel of any apparent interpersonal engagement. So it's this whole amazing dance, and even though there may be words and logic and exchange of ideas on some levels, there's all sorts of other things going on too. Human interaction is an amazing phenomenon. And even though it has obviously a strong semantic component, it's certainly not limited to that. Obviously and palpable to anyone that pays attention. I would argue.
Do you think that when we're in the presence of people who are more realized, that there is more chance of us becoming realized?
I don't know if I'd put it as more of a chance, but I would say from my own experience, definitely. But again, what happens in this dance of spiritual engagement is very nonlinear and very irrational, so it's hard to know exactly what's happening. It's hard to attribute anything to anything else, even if it seems to be a certain way. But I can say in my case, I attribute a very large part of my the experiences I've had in realizing this to just hanging out with another person. And there was very little in the way of teaching or explanation involved. It was mainly just hanging out. He was a drinking buddy. And over the course of several years, I would hang out with him and drink with him and listen to him tell stories. And yet, in that context, something about the nature of the way he was, through that interaction, was catalytic in an inconceivably profound and amazing, kind of a chain reaction of experiences that I had that were just amazingly revelatory to me. And again, it's sort of arbitrary to attribute it to him or to hanging out with him, but I can say that historically it seemed to happen in that context, and it sure felt that way. So in terms of my experience, I would say definitely yes. But again, to try and pin down exactly what that is and how it works, and if it's reliable or repeatable in many ways, sort of anybody's guess. But it's long been a spiritual claim that if you want to progress in spirituality, hang out with holy people, hang out with spiritual people who seem to have some degree of spiritual advancement or whatever. Oh yeah, whatever.
Well, even if you just take it on an intellectual level, what the Buddha said, supposedly said, an hour with a wise man is worth 1,000 years with a fool. It seems to apply.
I mean, in the East, there's long, in many traditions, there's long been, a tradition of, well, you find them, you want to progress in spirituality, you find the resident holy man, you go sweep out his fireplace, or carry his garbage, or just basically be his servant for a while, just to be around. And in the course of that, maybe he'll invite you to sit down and talk, or maybe he'll give you some instruction, or maybe not, or whatever. But supposedly just by participating and being around these kinds of people, that can be, there can be some bang for your effort. But it's hard to erect a real reliable description of philosophy on all this. But it's hard to, in fact, it's impossible to say how anything works, so it's not surprising. I mean, everything is ultimately completely inconceivable and undescribable, so the fact that this stuff is too is no surprise, right?
This noticing sensing experience or experiencing experience. It alpha together, I mean, what it points to what you are as well.
Exactly, it reveals what you are.
And the experience can't be separated from the experience.
Exactly.
Which can't be separated from what you are.
Exactly so. Exactly so. And that's very profound and powerful. This is why realization is often called self-realization. Because when you discover what this is, you discover what you are. Because you are there. And of course any participation in this through noticing noticing is essentially realization. Noticing is in this path you're using realization as the vehicle to realization. So it's not like you're using some intermediary to something else that's over here, but noticing itself is a momentary realization. And it's through familiarizing yourself with the flavor of that realization that you acclimatize yourself to what it's like, which is very, in many ways profoundly different and other than what human normalcy seems to be like. And so as you familiarize yourself with that, you begin to get more and more of a feeling of what this is, of what you are, and the whole thing integrates, or reveals that it is integrated around this amazing quality, which is you, which is this, which is the world. Absolutely. And it's very direct. It's not even an implication or something that follows on it. It is that. This noticing is itself. Noticing is experience. Noticing is reality. And even any bit of it is all of it. A taste of noticing is full realization, whether you stay there and set up housekeeping or not. In the Tibetans have a tradition they call Dzogchen, which is essentially their way of putting this that I'm advocating here today. In Dzogchen it said you use realization as the path to realization. The goal is the path. So use the goal as the path. So rather than some practice that leads to something else, the practice is realization itself. And because it happens that it's easy to find realization within experience, because experience is intrinsically that. And so you just find some place where you can notice that. And again, as we started off talking about today, the only impediment to that is the edifice, the seeming, solidity and edifice of our interpretive framework, which seems to be other than that. Well, why don't we take a brief break? I'm going to have to knock off in about a half hour, I'm afraid. But why don't we take a 5-minute break, because this stuff gets a little dizzying after a while, I know. Oh, that's possible.
So I'll email.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Okay.
It's here. Peter, it's stuff Peter makes Vietnamese coffee. Yeah. And oh my God, it's good.
Yeah.
It's very, very smooth, but it's also very, very, keep me awake. Get me so I can make it to the plane.
Yeah.
Then I pass out.
And then we can follow up
Oh, yeah, oh, so there was a big pain, right? Oh, no. Oh, is there any, yeah. There's one that was talking about.
You started reading my first assumption, but I guess it's Buddha.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's quite profound.
Yeah, it's really good. You have to go the distance. It's very artful because it presents it sort of in layers, and each layer sort of is deeper than the more profound than the last layer. And so you get to the end, and it just basically dismantles everything. Yeah, it's great fun. I like that book. There's a lot of Dzogchen books that are not really pure Dzogchen. Tibetan Buddhism is very complex because there's a lot of its organization and hence a lot of its teaching is political. So and it also tries to reconcile irreconcilable approaches under the pretense that they're all the aspects of the same thing, which I think is a big error. Dzogchen stands on its own. And pure Dzogchen, or what you might call radical Dzogchen, which the earliest Dzogchen is exclusively, and a certain amount of the later Dzogchen is very direct, and it's essentially exactly what we're playing with today. But a lot of Dzogchen presentations that you can find in books, maybe 60% of them or something, maybe even more, are intermixed with tantric teachings, which are teachings. Dzogchen has nothing to do with process. Dzogchen has nothing to do with working with something, changing something to achieve something else. But tantric approaches do. Dzogchen is all just about noticing the transcendence, which is already the case. Yeah. And there's a lot of ways to put it, a lot of ways to split a hair, but a lot of supposedly Dzogchen presentations are intermixed with Tantrism because of the Tibetans trying to make Dzogchen an aspect of Tantra and Tantra an aspect of Dzogchen. So they kind of pretend that they're all the same thing, even though they aren't. So, and it can be confusing if you're approaching it from outside, because they're calling it Dzogchen, but it isn't actually Dzogchen, so it can be very disorienting. But that's one of the good ones. That book is one of the good ones.
Did you say the name of the book?
It's called Buddhahood Without Meditation. There's a bunch of Buddhahood Without Meditation. It's a nice book. It's presented in the guise of a series of visionary experiences by this one this one lama. But it's sort of a fantastic series of narrations. But they're each, as the series progresses, it's a progressively more profound analysis of what experience is. So it sort of conducts you step by step into looking at experience more and more profoundly. Well, anyway, we're back-ish. So I'm going to have to leave, unfortunately, in about 15 minutes, but that's 15 minutes. So anything we haven't touched on, if there's anything that is, lurking in the back of your mind as an issue that you find curious or interesting that hasn't been dealt with explicitly, and you'd like to bring it up, now would be a good time.
I just noticed that you mentioned how the mind is always there's always this effort to create a structure in which everything fits, whether it's Soja or Tantra or whatever.
Absolutely.
And I noticed that running for me all the time.
Oh, yeah, good.
When your mind hits the glass, or when the light comes through the glass. I'm doing it. The light comes through the glass, picks up your shirt.
Sure.
There's this refraction and stuff. Just this perpetually running. And
always. It's his nature to do so.
If I'm not worried about it, it's okay.
Because again, it's a partial functioning in a vast context, which is all very different than that. So even though the mind is analyzing over here, vision is occurring outside the context of that analysis, and sound is occurring outside the context of that analysis, and sensations, touch is occurring outside the context. So even though all these different, we might classify them as subfields of experience are occurring, they don't actually impinge on each other. And no field actually blocks another field. And so the field of thought is only relevant to the field of thought, and it's actually fairly localized. I mean, metaphorically speaking, it's not like you can find an actual place where thought is, but nonetheless, the thought sort of occurs in its own dimension, let's call it, and vision occurs in its own dimension. They don't actually get in each other's way. And hearing occurs in its own dimension. So even when your mind is just turning away 1,000,000 miles a second, vision is just sitting in pristine silence, just sitting here. And they don't actually impinge on each other, even if we're used to thinking that they do. But if you look closely, you'll notice that they occur independently, or at least, concurrently. Kind of like on the computer, on my computer screen in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little clock that's always running. It's always running, but it doesn't impinge on whatever else is happening and whatever other windows I have open. They sort of occur in their own little dimensions without blocking each other. And the same thing happens with interpretive frames of reference. They only happen where they're happening, and experience is happening everywhere else, not being interpreted. And yet these interpretive frames of reference have a kind of a seemingly hypnotic power to claim to apply to everything. They sort of seem to bleed over into all of experience. But if you look very closely, you'll notice they don't. Vision, for example, is always just the presence of light and color and shape and all these various things. And they aren't light and color and shape until the mind starts thinking about it. And the mind doesn't think about light and color and shape in the light and color and shape, it thinks about it in mind. So there's always an outside of any aspect of experience. There's always more experience outside that aspect, which will be different and other than that in that particular experience. Particularly in the case of mind, as we're talking about.
Yeah, that's where I had many years ago, I met Meher Baba, and he was supposed to be, if you hugged him, you were supposed to end up crying. Well, nothing happened with me.
You didn't take his advice. Don't worry, be happy.
No, but I finally got around to reading his book, God Speaks, right? And one major bone of contention I had with him was that he says, well, eventually you get to the point where the only thing is a world of thought, right? And like you say, that's one dimension or one frequency level, you know. And who's to say that what we think is thought is not very low in terms of frequency, you know. So who knows what's beyond that? It's fun to find out.
Yeah, there's infinite dimensions of experience. But, you know, even though dimension, you know, the interesting thing about experience is even though it's infinitely differentiated, it's all the same thing. It's, you know, experience is one thing that happens in one way that presents as infinitely differentiated. So you can find a common denominator that all experience is inclusively, even though experience presents in such a vast, inconceivably vast range of differences. But it's always this, experience is always instantaneous, it's always present, and it is always qualitative. It always presents an infinite range of differentiating qualities. Also, very explicitly, experience is always completely and utterly beyond anything that can be said of it, which renders everything I've said today utter bullshit. Because what this is explicitly itself. And anything you say more than that is being too specific, too partialized.
But it's beautiful.
And it's pure beauty. It's pure joy. It's pure. It's life. It's pure. It's meaning.
That's true. Like the paintings are. They're not the trees. They're the paintings. It's really awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's all awesome. And what this is awesome. You know? And that's really the point of it. It's just to get to that. You know, just to really let yourself drink in that awesomeness.
It's a miracle that it happens at all.
It's a complete miracle. It's a literal, actual miracle. This right here, this is a miracle. You forget walking on water. Where'd the water come from?
Somebody poured it on the floor.
I've been the last lately trying to break out of this frame of reference.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're talking, or you're talking, I'm thinking perhaps I need to, instead of pushing it away and trying to deny it and break out of it, to go into it.
Sure. Go into it. But trying to do anything with reference to a frame of reference is giving the frame of reference more power. To try to fix a problem is to give the problem more power and authority by declaring it important enough to be fixed. Whereas laughing at it or abandoning it or noticing the way in which there's more than it is invalidating it, because you are saying you're not even important enough to pay attention to. I'm going over here. So approaching anything in terms of the thing is just actually reinforcing it. So trying to get out of a frame of reference makes the frame of reference stronger. Whereas if you just, I don't give a shit about the frame of reference. What's happening over here? You just sort of bypass it without doing it with reference to it. You're not going over here because you're going away from it. You're going over here because you're just going over here. It's maybe a subtle thing, but it can be a really powerful trick. I mean, it's kind of like I was talking about before. I was joking about, not joking, but I mean, semi-joking about acknowledging that you're a fuck up and a failure and useless and incompetent. You know, it's a strategy to stop doing things with reference to trying to shore yourself up or fix yourself or improve yourself. If you're beyond hope, then you just give up. It's like, I surrender. You're a lost cause. Who are you? And then, so at that point, there's nothing there to orient towards. There's nothing there that you need to care about one way or the other, and that frees you up to be oriented in other ways. You know, as opposed to our subliminal egoic orienting of being with ourselves and trying to be the best we can be and trying this and trying that, all of which is fine and so on and so forth, but it can be entrapping and kind of create a tunnel vision of that can kind of seem to constrict us and seem to contain us. So the best way to deal with the problem is not with regard to the problem, but just totally disregard the existence of the problem one way or the other. Say, okay, you win. Now I'm going over here.
I just at work and I walk down the hall to go to the bathroom. It's become this time to you just need to walk, not as a body. I mean, as a body, but be aware of more than just,
sure.
You know. But then I'm knowing perhaps I'm just perpetuating.
It's an art form. You play with it. You play with it. You know, the ease and effortlessness is the key. Letting go is the key. And letting go of needing to let go especially is the key. As long as you need to let go, then it's impossible to let go. So, but again, that's with reference to some holdings. Because needing to let go is again with reference to some not letting go. So you're actually empowering the not letting go. It's all subtle. It's magic. You have to learn the rules of magic. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. Well, I've had a wonderful time being with you all here today. I hope it's been interesting for you. And I hope to see you sometime real soon. I intend to be up here in 2 months, and so hopefully that will come to be.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, my pleasure.